Welcome to Eternal Dread, where fear never sleeps. Tell us where you're watching from and what time it is, because terror has no limits. If you're brave enough, share and comment, but beware, something might be watching you too. Now, turn off the lights and let the dread begin. A chill down my spine roused me from a deep, dreamless sleep. I was sleeping on a hard, cold surface. I slowly opened my eyes and looked around in the dark. At first my mind was completely blank. Then a million questions passed through my head as my eyes adjusted to the dark, and I recognized the dark shopping mall that I was in. Dim lights were on in various places. They did a poor job of illuminating the mall. I looked down and realized I was sleeping on a bench in the middle of the mall. How did I get here? I tried to focus on the last thing I could remember. I was walking around the shopping mall. Wait, what was I there for? Yes, I was there to buy groceries. No, I was going to buy clothes. I shook my head in an attempt to clear my thoughts. I was walking around the shopping mall. There was this lady, or was it a man? They were wearing a black coat. No, it was a blue jacket. Every time I tried to replay my previous memories, they seemed to dissolve into other memories until I wasn't certain of anything. The only thing that remained consistent was the memory of me walking in the shopping mall. I got off the bench and decided to forget about how I got here and move my focus to getting out of here and going home. My parents must be getting worried for me. What is the time? I instinctively reached into my pocket as my mind started to wander again. My heart skipped a beat. My fingers searched for the familiar smooth surface of my phone in my pocket, but I could not find it. I frantically searched my other pocket and realized that my phone was not with me. Fear seemed to flow in my veins like a strong drug as I realized that I could no longer call for help. Anxious thoughts clouded my mind until I could no longer form any coherent thoughts. The panic and gravity of my situation had set in fully. I need to get out of here. It's just a mall. I just have to go to the nearest exit. I walked around and tried to get my bearings. I visited this mall frequently and knew the place like the back of my hand, but in the dark, the place was completely different. The absence of the usual cacophony of people's noises made the place seem liminal. Let alone knowing where the nearest exit was, I struggled to even figure out which floor I was on. Perhaps what made this worse was the absence of my phone, which I could have used to call for help or even as a flashlight to navigate. I suddenly recognized the big cinema entrance in front of me as I walked towards it. Everything started to click in my head, and I realized I was on the third floor. My memory of how I got here started to clear up. I was coming out of the cinemas with my friends. We had just finished watching. What had we watched? I wasn't even sure if the sudden flashback I got was true. For all I could know, it could have been a memory from the past. I've been to this cinema multiple times. Discounts come as a perk for residents of the town. The cinema had a fire escape that led directly to the outside. This was the closest exit to me, and the next closest one would involve navigating down a couple of escalators to get to the ground floor. In the dark, this task would be nearly impossible. I walked into the cinema. The whole place was unsettling in a way that I could not place. The lightning was bright enough to allow me to see the outlines of objects, but was too dim to make out any details. My gut instincts urged me to run out of there, but I continued in hope of getting out through the fire escape. I walked past the reception. My feet made soft thuds against the carpet. Past the reception was a hallway leading to various. My heart raced inside my chest, and I could swear my heartbeats were echoing around the space. I walked down the hallway despite every part of my body telling me not to. It was dead silent. Every one of my steps were amplified. I walked down the hallway and past the double doors leading to each theater room. I quickened my pace to a jog. My mind was brimming with an unsettling feeling. A figure walked past me. I froze and whipped my head around. There was nothing. I was just being paranoid. I resumed my walk. In the back of my head, a new thought arose. A thought I desperately wanted to ignore. But as I walked down that hallway, it became more and more apparent. I should have been at the end of the hallway by now. It was talking too long. I broke into a full sprint. The double doors blurred at my sides as I ran, and ran in desperation of reaching the end of the hallway. I ran past a figure. The sudden intrusion made me trip and fall flat on the floor. As soon as my palms touched the floor, I felt them get coated in a liquid. Instinctively, I pulled my hands away from the mysterious liquid. Why was there water on the floor? As I got up and looked behind me, I was face to face with the figure that I had passed. The figure had a smooth face with no features except for large white eyes. They were large, comically large and so white that they had a glow. They were bloodshot with thin red veins running all through the eye. The pupils were small, almost the size of a pinhead, and were pitch black. I fell backwards and let out a yelp. The creature stayed completely still. Adrenaline soared through my veins as I scrambled to my feet and started running away from the creature. It continued to stay frozen in the same stance. Those horrible eyes followed me as I ran further and further away. I stopped to catch my breath when I ran a safe distance away from the creature. The hallway had still not come to an end, and it only seemed to be getting darker and darker. I kept on seeing a turn in the hallway further ahead, but no matter how far I walked, it seemed to stay the same distance away from me, like it was just a mirage in the desert. Just a mirage, a flicker of hope. A pond of water in a dry desert. I looked away and headed for one of the double doors leading to the theaters. As soon as I opened the doors, a blinding white light nearly fried my eyes. I used my hand to shield my eyes and waited for them to adjust to the new lighting after having been in the dark for so long. The theater screen was showing me walking around the mall. Then suddenly the screen darkened and transitioned into me walking through the mall in the dark. It showed me the entire journey up until the point at which I walked into the theater room, and to my surprise the film did not stop. In fact, it continued, playing into the future. I would continue watching the film for a while before I would walk to the front of the theater and reach the doors marked with green exit signs. There I would face the same creature halfway through the exit hallway. The creature would reach out to me with deep black tentacles and would crush me with them. I whimpered in horror as I watched the graphic video of me getting impaled by those horrible black tentacles. The screen turned to black and turned off after the video ended. I stood there in inexplicable horror, still staring at the screen that foretold the future like some sick fortune teller. I looked beside the massive theater screen and saw the door marked with the green exit lights. I had 3 choices: exit door, stay, back to hallway. Out of the 3, I struggled to pick one, and as I stood there I started to hear the eerie creak of the exit door slowly opening. I stared at the door as the creature came out of it and looked directly at me with those large white bloodshot eyes. I quickly turned around and ran back into the hallway, but this time, something was different. I cried tears of relief when I saw that the hallway had come to an end and that the fire escape door was right there. I walked out of the fire escape door, and suddenly the sunlight outside seared my retinas after having spent so long in the dark. It took my eyes quite a bit to adjust to the daylight, and then it hit me. It wasn't nighttime at all. The mall should be open. I stepped back inside the mall through the fire escape and saw lots of people walking around in and out of the theater rooms. Walking out of the cinema, the whole mall that was empty in dark moments before I left it was now full with the usual bustle of shoppers. My phone was on the same bench as the one I had woken up on. Apparently it had fallen out of my pocket. Become a paid beta tester now. The small minimal ad peeked at me from the very bottom of my screen. My eyes lit up at the sight of the words VR and paid. I hovered my cursor over the ad for a few seconds, contemplating whether I should click or not. Before I could make a conclusive decision, my finger quickly clicked, and now I was on the home page of a usual product website. It had images of this sleek black headset. It seemed like a normal headset, except for one thing that I couldn't place. Then it hit me. The headset had 2 electrodes attached to it. Apart from that feature, there were no accessories, such as the usual controllers you would find with most headsets. The main title read in a futuristic serif font, Virus Reality. I scrolled through the website and absorbed snippets of information on how the device worked. Virus Reality aims to break past the boundaries of virtual reality with revolutionary cutting-edge technology. The 2 electrodes attached to the headset can be attached to the forehead to connect with the brain. The electrodes are able to simulate the senses of the virtual world, thus providing the most immersive virtual reality to date. The rest of the description took a further delve into technical specs that were of no real importance. Our device is awaiting its first round of beta testers. We understand concerns for safety, and therefore we are willing to pay beta testers adequately and offer complete financial coverage for any troubles caused by the machine. Currently, we are paying $10,000 for 1 week of beta testing with medical cover. Sign up below. I pressed the sign up button, assuring myself that if it was a scam, it would also ask for my credit card. A form popped up on the page that asked me to fill in one field: my address. After some more confrontation, I put my address in the website, expecting to get my house robbed in a few days. I humored the idea of moving out if this truly turned out to be a scam. The headset came a couple of days later with no previous notice. It was a bit weird. I brought the package inside and ripped it open like it was my Christmas present back when I was 10. Inside I found a thank you note, a user manual, a set of warnings, and the VR headset. I threw aside most of the paper stuff and immediately picked up the headset. Thinking back to it, it was imperative that I should have read that manual along with the warnings. There was a folded up piece of paper inside the headset that was basically an infographic that highlighted most of the headset's buttons and controls. The headset was made of matte black ceramic and was smoothly brushed all around. It was just like I had expected, a premium device made from the best of materials available. The front of the headset was smooth and blank except for the words Virus Reality embellished onto the ceramic in a modernistic thin font. To the left of the headset was a power button, a scroll wheel for senses adjustment, and an eject switch. The eject switch was large and protruded from the side of the headset. It spoiled the minimal sleek design of the headset. The idea of the eject button puzzled me until I saw the electrodes tucked inside a groove at the top of the headset. The electrodes matched the black color theme of the rest of the headset and were connected to the headset each by short, thin black wires. The inside of the electrodes was sticky, and I assumed they were to be stuck on the forehead. I put on the headset and attached the electrodes onto my forehead. I moved my fingers over to the power button, feeling my way around the cool, smooth surface. My heart thudded in my chest, and my legs were filled with jittery energy as I pressed that button. It was a bit anticlimactic, to say the least. The screen lit up, and the following words appeared on the screen in a smooth transition. The words were slightly blurry and out of focus, but readable nonetheless. A smooth female voice read out the words to me. Adjust sensor's clarity dial to calibrate brain wave sensors. The speakers on this headset were amazing. The pitch was on point, and every syllable in the smooth female voice seemed real. My hopes got high again for the headset, and I quickly reached for the senses adjustment dial and fidgeted with it until the text on the screen was sharp and visible. The speakers, seemingly sensing that I had adjusted the vision, spoke up again. Starting Virus Reality in 5 seconds. Press the eject button to cancel. My finger hesitantly moved over the large eject switch at the side of the headset. I didn't have enough time to make a conclusive decision once more when the speakers started to play a soft, serene tune that seemed to circle around my head. The melodic tune died down shortly, and I suddenly noticed that it was absolutely silent. Then in the fraction of a second, with absolutely no forewarning, my entire body got sucked into my own head. It felt like I had died. There was no sensory input in that place, and I lost track of time. I had lost complete control of my thoughts, and it soon felt like my thoughts weren't even mine. I heard my thoughts speak to me, downloading memories to build world. Memories of my entire life started to play out in my head like some sort of super sped-up movie, and I was hit with emotion after emotion that I had probably felt in those memories. It felt like my brain was getting overworked, and I was honestly on the verge of mental breakdown when suddenly my living room just appeared out of nowhere. It felt like I had just awoken from a nap, and I started to wonder if it had all been a seriously vivid dream. I felt the remnants of a headache, and I felt like I had flown 48 hours straight. I was genuinely wondering if the previous events were a dream. There was no way to reality check either. I suddenly got an idea and quickly rushed to the kitchen to grab the sharpest knife that I owned. I brushed my fingers over the knife to really assess whether it felt real or not. It felt as real could be. I quickly slashed the knife across my index finger in a quick motion. I felt intense pain almost immediately, and soon after blood started to pour out of the cut. I cursed myself for believing in my dreams and bandaged my cut. I thought I was really not in Virus Reality until the glitches started. At first they were minor, and then slowly it felt like the whole world was starting to decay into a nightmare. The very first glitch happened 2 days in. My coffee cup would always be empty, even though I vividly remembered putting coffee in it. 2 days after, it periodically disappeared. I drove myself crazy trying to find the coffee cup, only to find it in my hands right after I blinked. These minor glitches seemed to drive me crazy to the point until I snapped. I feel like I sent a power surge or something through to the headset, because when I snapped and started to break things in my house, the real nightmare started. I woke up to dark figures standing at the tip of my bed staring at me with wide white eyes that had tiny pupils at the center. These creatures would inch closer and closer to me as soon as I woke up. They surrounded me like sharp knives, but never touched me or harmed me. It was the psychological horror aspect that scarred me. Soon after I started to get used to this, the VR decided to change it up and I started to wake up in random horrifying places. Perhaps the most horrifying one was when I woke up in an abandoned hospital. There were blood stains all over the floor, and soon zombie-like doctors and nurses started to surround me. I ran from them, but eventually collapsed from exhaustion. This time they did harm me. They took greedy bites out of my skin. My exposed flesh burned in the air, and I couldn't take it anymore. The following day ended my life by jumping off the roof of a building I had woken up on. I'm surprised it took me that long to come to that. I suddenly jolted awake with the VR headset still on my head, but the electrodes now hanging at the sides of the headset. I had somehow gotten them off my forehead and ended the nightmare. I ripped off the headset and disposed of the entire package the following day. I really thought I was out of the nightmare until the glitches started to happen again. Minor things like a coffee cup would go missing, and suddenly they grew into worse and worse things. I was constantly being tortured, and my existence was nothing more than hell. I tried to end my life multiple times only to find myself back in my bed. I need to escape. Please let me die. End of patient note. The following was the note left by our most recent patient. He was initially brought into the institute because of his delusions. He believes that he is living in a virtual world and that he needs to die in order to return to the actual world. He has been in a state of constant terror and has exhibited fear from us as well. He finally took his life last night. I don't usually share potentially confidential patient records like this, but today I came across an ad for a VR headset called Virus Reality. Can I check your ticket, please? I handed the ticket that I'd been twirling around in my hands for the past hour to the flight attendant. She nodded at it approvingly before producing a sheet of paper from the file that she was holding and placing it inside my folded ticket. Have a nice flight, she commented enthusiastically before handing my ticket back to me. I grabbed my ticket and stared at the folded sheet of paper inside my ticket curiously before finding my seat. Once I settled down in my seat, I removed the folded sheet of paper from my ticket and placed the ticket in my bag. Upon unfolding the sheet of paper, I realized it was a handwritten note. The handwriting seemed rushed. I've transcribed the note from memory here. Rules for surviving this flight. 1. Do not speak of this sheet to any passenger. You are the only human on this flight. 2. Check the time on your phone after reading this sheet. All rules will apply based on the time of your phone. 3. During the first hour of the flight, do not talk to anyone. People may try to talk to you, but ignore them completely. 4. During the second hour of the flight, you may start talking again, but if anyone mention the window, do not look outside the window in any circumstances. 5. If you hear a child crying in the cabin, immediately run to the bathroom. 6. If the screen of your entertainment console suddenly goes black, immediately look away and do not stare at it. 7. During the third hour of the flight, the captain will make an announcement. Follow the instructions. 8. During the fourth hour of the flight, do not sit in your seat. 9. If you make it past the fourth hour, you will need to spend the rest of the flight evading the chaser. You will know who the chaser is when you see them. 10. The captain will make an announcement of the plane landing. As soon as you hear this announcement, push your way to the exit door and open it. 11. You will find that the outside is simply a black void. Jump into it without hesitation. I reread the rules again while chuckling. Did they give one of these to every passenger, or was I somehow randomly chosen for this prank? I checked the time on my phone just to humor the list. 7:13 a.m. So this would be the first hour of the flight. Suddenly a young man walked over to my seat and sat right beside me. I gave him a casual side glance and saw that he was carrying what looked to be a laptop bag. Great, I thought. He'll work on whatever he's doing and leave me alone for the flight. The man didn't even bother to exchange a single word with me as he settled down in his seat and put on his seatbelt. He stared straight ahead and completely avoided me. I let him be and started to fiddle with my flight console. Some people just like to be left alone, I guess. Soon enough the captain made an announcement of the plane starting, and the steady hum of the plane engines started to vibrate the entire cabin. The plane started to accelerate until the G-force pushed me into my seat. Moments later I felt the plane rising into the air. I am typically not scared of flights, but getting on a flight always makes me a bit nervous. This time though, my stomach was in knots and beads of sweat were running down my forehead. My instincts told me I was stepping into danger, grave danger. I dismissed my thoughts and that awful gut feeling, chalking it down to feeling a little creeped out by the note. The young man on my left suddenly tapped on my shoulder. I jolted up like I'd just been electrocuted. Even through my jacket, his hand felt cold. Cold and heavy like a dead person's hand. I turned around and faced the young man. His face seemed wrong. You know how those realistic human robots can creep people out because of how close to human they are, yet subconsciously we can tell that they aren't human. This man was giving me that same unsettling feeling, and his facial features were just artificial in a way I couldn't place. Maybe it was his eyes. A little too big, the pupils abnormally dilated. Or maybe it was his nose, not exactly in the center of his face. Or perhaps it was his mouth, lips way too thin and long. Don't get me wrong, he didn't look obnoxiously fake. In fact, it was those very subtle blemishes in his facial features that made him look like something trying to look like a human. And then he spoke. His voice was normal. Upon hearing his voice, the man seemed to look normal too, and I thought I was just freaking out for no reason. "Hey, do you wear headphones?" he asked. That was a weird question to ask. Did he want headphones? I was about to open my mouth to speak when he spoke again. "How would you feel if I cut your hand off right now?" What was disturbing wasn't the nature of the question itself, but the fact that he spoke in such a calm manner. It was as if he was asking me how my day was. Suddenly my mind went to the list of rules that I had subconsciously been squeezing in my hand. The first rule said to not talk to anyone on the flight, no matter how much they try to talk to you. I decided to ignore the man. He seemed really weird anyways, and if I was being honest, the list of rules wasn't the reason I chose to ignore him. He stopped pestering me and returned to work on his laptop. I looked over at his laptop slowly and gasped at what I saw on his screen. He had a photo of me on his screen. That's it. Nothing else, just a full screen photo of me. Before I could process that properly, I looked over at his keyboard and noticed that it wasn't a standard keyboard. In fact, it really wouldn't even count as a keyboard. It was made up of oddly shaped keys, all marked with strange letters that I doubt existed. The man continued to stare intently at the photo of me on his screen. It was then that I realized that the list of rules wasn't a joke. Suddenly a flight attendant popped out of nowhere and asked me, "Sir, is this man bothering you?" "Yes, he is," I replied before my voice caught up in my throat. In under a second, everyone in the cabin snapped their heads around until they were staring directly at me. Their faces, they all looked wrong. Inhuman. Slowly their long, thin lips curled into wide smiles and red tears started to roll down their faces. What had moments before been a fairly typical flight had now turned into a nightmare. I sat there, cornered in my seat, as the entire cabin of people had their faces turned to me, eyes locked with me. Red tears were rolling down their uncanny faces, and their lips were curled into impossibly wide smiles. The flight attendant that had tricked me into talking to her also did the same thing, now completely silent. I waited for them to jump me to attack me, but they did absolutely nothing. Seconds dragged into minutes, yet the people just stared. They didn't make an effort to move. It looked like they were locked in place, just staring at me. As the initial shock wore off and my ravaged heartbeat started to slow down, I started to think about what to do. I had obviously broken the first rule, but apart from being a little unnerved, it hadn't caused much harm to me. The plane's PA system turned on again, and the captain made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are coming across some unexpected turbulence. Please remain in your seats to stay safe." His voice was monotone and void of emotion. Every single syllable made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Everyone in the cabin seemed to dismiss my presence at that moment and return to their usual things. The cabin returned to normal, and I nearly convinced myself that I just had a very realistic nightmare. It wasn't until I saw the young man's laptop next to me that I realized it wasn't over yet. His laptop was still the same with a keyboard from another world, and most importantly, he still had a picture of me on his screen. He continued to stare at it, and tapped the keys on his keyboard as if he was typing something. I reread the list of rules and noticed the 7th rule. During the 3rd hour of the flight, the captain will make an announcement. Follow the instructions. The rule sheet stated that the captain would make an announcement during the 3rd hour of the flight. Yet as I checked my phone, I realized I was still in the 1st hour of the flight. Either breaking the first rule had changed the complete course of things, or the rules sheet simply didn't account for all scenarios. I desperately hoped that the latter was true, because otherwise, the precious rules sheet that was supposed to get me out of here would now be worthless. A sudden jolt across the whole cabin interrupted my thoughts. The captain hadn't lied about the turbulence. In fleeting moments, the entire plane was shaking. There was nothing against looking through the window in the rules, apart from during the 2nd hour, so I pulled up the blind on the tiny circular plane window and gasped when I saw the outside. All I saw was a thick black void that seemed to undulate like rich black velvet. I saw the lights from the plane start to get warped and twisted as the beams traveled through the void. Don't get me wrong, the void wasn't just completely black. No, it was full of light rays twisting and warping. The best I can describe the void's movement is like an ocean of thick black waves. My mind went to every sci-fi movie and book I'd ever read, and I entertained the thought that I was inside a wormhole. Or perhaps a black hole. How the regular Boeing plane managed to not get crushed in this physics-bending space was an impossible question to answer. I slowly turned my head away from the window. It took a lot of willpower to look away, as if something from those inky black depths hypnotized me. Everyone in the cabin seemed completely oblivious to what was happening and continued to go about their regular business. I checked the time on my phone, and my heart skipped a beat. An entire hour had passed in just those few moments I spent looking out into the void. I quickly looked over at the rules sheet to see what I would have to do for the second hour of the flight. During the second hour of the flight, you may start talking again, but if anyone mentions the window, do not look outside the window in any circumstances. While the rule did state it was okay to talk, I really didn't want to talk to anyone in this cabin. I also reread the rule about going to the washroom when I hear a child crying, and also not looking at my in-flight entertainment console if the screen turns black. It all seemed pretty standard stuff, and I thought I'd seen the worst already. This gave me newfound motivation to follow all the rules to the dot and get out of here quickly. I started to head out to the washroom to relieve myself, knowing that I'd be busy during the third and fourth hours of the flight. As I was walking to the washroom, a woman frantically caught up with me. She seemed absolutely frightened. Are you also stuck here?" She asked while looking me up and down. "Did you also get the set of rules?" I said. "Yes, but I lost the sheet. Can I just read yours?" she pleaded. I considered it for a moment and decided to give her my sheet because she seemed really desperate. It felt good to have someone else be in the same situation as me, because now I could rely on someone else to help me out. I gave her the sheet, and she thanked me profusely. After giving it a quick read, much to my relief, she handed it back to me. "I'm Sarah, by the way," she said. "Nice to meet you, I'm Ethan." I replied, "We need to get out of here, and I think our best bet is following these rules." "That's right, I'm glad I'm not the only person here on this flight," she said. "About the others, well, they don't seem human to me." She seemed to have calmed down a bit too quickly. It felt like she was putting up a facade, but I chalked it up to being on edge from the situation I was in. "So, I guess we got another half an hour until the third hour starts," she said. We suddenly started to hear the shrill cries of a child in the cabin. She immediately took my hand and rushed us both over to the washroom. There we spent the next few minutes listening to those shrill cries get more and more inhuman as the minutes passed. Just before they finally died down, they were high-pitched shrieks that still ring in my ears to this day. My left ear started to literally bleed as the frequency of the sound ruptured my eardrum. Sarah seemed unfazed by the sound. I guess it affects different people differently. Soon enough, it was the third hour of the flight, and the captain made another announcement in his emotionless monotone voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, please proceed to the front of the plane." Absolutely no one in the cabin moved. I looked at Sarah, and she nodded at me, giving me the affirmative to go to the front. We both started to walk to the front of the plane, pacing through rows and rows of people comfortably lounging in their seats. No one seemed to have even heard the announcement. At the front of the plane, I saw the door to the pilot's cockpit open. I walked inside with Sarah right behind me and noticed two things. 1. There was no pilot. 2. Outside the plane, I could see a vast red land, with fire and lava crisscrossing the dried earth like rivers and purple trees dotting the barren landscape. I stared into the outside, shocked at the otherworldly landscape. The place wasn't uninhabited, though. Large concrete buildings were concentrated in several areas. Where we had arrived, I had no idea. Sarah started to laugh behind me. It was at that moment that all the pieces of the puzzle clicked together in my head. I realized why Sarah felt so off. She knew what time it was on my phone, even though she never checked it. There was no way she could have known which hour of the flight it was unless she had her own phone, which she never did. She didn't get affected by that shrill, high-pitched scream in the cabin. She was acting way too calm, like she knew exactly what was happening. As I felt Sarah's nails dig into both my shoulders, I realized that the list of rules had failed me when I broke the first rule. I had changed the course of things, and those rules no longer had a time frame. Sarah continued to dig her nails into my shoulders and pierced my skin through my jacket. She leaned in close and whispered, "I am the chaser." I was stuck in a bit of a pickle. The chaser had tricked me and cornered me in the cockpit, and the plane seemed to have traveled to another dimension. I probably would have had a panic attack and mental breakdown at that moment, but I had something more important to deal with. The nails of Sarah, or the chaser I guess, continued to dig into my shoulder and stab through my jacket into my skin. She seemed to possess inhumane strength from the way she easily punctured my jacket and then my skin with just a blunt nail. But as I slowly turned my head around, I realized Sarah was truly just a facade. She had transformed into something else entirely. Her skin had gone completely white like a sheet of paper, and her fingers now ended in jagged, sharp yellow fingernails. Her face had warped into a misfigured eyes, nose and mouth that barely resembled the Sarah that I had gotten to know. I quickly pushed back against her and kind of fell on her to push myself and her out of the cockpit. You don't truly know what you are capable of until you get that adrenaline surge in a survival situation. When your primal instincts take over, you don't think about anything you do. And then as soon as I was free from her grasp, I ran. I won't bore you with the details of the next 30 minutes of me running back and forth around the plane to avoid the chaser. At first, I thought the other passengers would react, maybe catch me or something, but they were all gone. The entire plane was empty, and it was only me and the chaser. I was starting to get tired and lose energy when the captain's voice broadcasted over the PA system once more. "The plane is landing at our destination. Please buckle your seatbelts." The chaser took one final look at me before disappearing to the back of the plane. It puzzled me how the captain was now back in the cockpit and landing the plane. Curiosity overtook me, and I thought I'd seen the worst already, so I decided to walk to the front of the plane and check the cockpit again. The door to the cockpit was open, and I could see a single man with his back to me operating the controls. He seemed normal enough, but after what I had experienced on this plane, I knew the last person I wanted to bother would be the captain. I swear I saw him turn his head around and look at me as I turned around and walked back. The plane landed eventlessly, and those emergency rubber slides also opened up to serve as exits in a place where there were no airports. Before I left the plane, I salvaged as much food and water as I could. Some of you may say that I should have stayed in the plane. While that would have been a good move, how long would I last there? Days? At most weeks? It's best I get myself used to this new dimension I've found myself in, rather than sit there and then look for food when starving. And of course, I still can't forget the chaser, who I believe is still on the plane. The landscape was an endless red desert. The only things that stood out in the landscape were the occasional purple trees and the towns of concrete buildings. The heat was unbearable. I looked up at the sky and saw 3 large suns in different positions, all radiating their heat and light onto this planet. The ground was incredibly dry, and I doubt the place ever received rain. In fact, there were several ravines that were filled with lava and molten rock. I knew I couldn't even survive a day in this heat, and had already completely soaked my clothes in sweat. I started to walk over to the closest concrete city I could find. It only took me 10 minutes to walk there, but those 10 minutes were absolute agony as I struggled to keep on walking in the heat. The beams from the 3 suns burnt the skin on the back of my neck and ears as I walked those 10 minutes. Just when I was about to pass out, I found the shade of a concrete building and threw myself into it. The relief was instant, and while that temperature didn't suddenly drop, it was 100 times better than being in the open. I finished an entire bottle of water in one sip and continued to lie down on the floor, nearly passing out from exhaustion and the heat. I didn't notice the suited man when he walked in front of me. "Welcome to hell, lost soul." He said that phrase like he had said it 1,000,000 times and was bored of it. He wore a black suit even in the sweltering heat and didn't seem to be a tiny bit uncomfortable. Hell? I asked, clearly confused at this man's statement. It may have been the heat getting to my head though, because that would not have been confusing to me and would actually explain the previous events. "Yes, son. This is hell. You're an unexpected visit though. Usually we keep track of who's coming in." He sighed in a tone similar to one a teacher would use when their student asks a dumb question. "Don't worry though, it's not a rare occurrence to have people that come and go. I'm not sure if you'll be able to leave though, so I'll set you up with what you are going to have to do for eternity," he said, as if he was just doing his regular job. "What do I have to do?" I asked, unable to fathom what the horrible task must be. "Oh, it's simple. We will take you under the ground where the beings that run your world will consume your fear and eventually your soul as sustenance," he said in a cold tone. I immediately stood up and began to run, but no matter how far I ran, the man seemed to be right beside me. He wasn't running, no, he was just standing still, waiting for me to give up. I tried my best to keep going, but the sweltering heat didn't make it any better. I was far away from the concrete city now, but the man suddenly snapped his fingers, and I was back under the shade of the building. "You can't escape," he smiled. "That's how I learnt the first rule of hell. There is no escape." But I got out, didn't I? How else would I be posting here? All I can say is that I am incredibly lucky. The man snapped his fingers once more, and we were down in what looked to be a vast underground cellar. I saw people being tortured in each cell by unimaginable creatures. I got a headache looking at those creatures, and could not look at them for a long time. The geometry of their bodies did not make sense. They had completely different parts. They weren't even composed of earthly colors. These were new colors that I have no words to describe. I saw a man who was tied down to a bed as an entity peeled his skin off him. His screams carried so much agony that they made me feel the pain. To this day, I will never get the screams in that cellar out of my head. I saw another woman being slowly dipped into lava. Her burnt body seemed to regenerate as soon as she was pulled out. The creature kept on doing it again and again, showing no signs of stopping. As the man walked me through this horrible place, I only had one word on mind. Why? Your souls are very powerful. We feed on your fear and suffering. If we didn't do this, the earth and your reality would not exist. As a return for letting you live a life on the paradise known as Earth, you give us your souls. Don't worry though, this doesn't happen for eternity. Eventually your souls are fully consumed, and no more than empty husks. You will find plenty of wasted souls roaming around up above, the man explained. So there's no heaven, I pleaded. What about God? There is no heaven. God has long left your kind behind. He considers your kind a failure, and let us deal with you as we please. I stood there in the underground torture chamber as a suited man told me about the afterlife and how it works. You know what's worse than that though? Monday mornings. Okay, maybe not. I was quite literally dead, and now this man was going to chuck me in a cell and torture me for eternity, except that didn't really happen. Don't worry, you really think we waste souls here first? No, we first make them work. Make them keep the barrier between your reality and ours strong, the suited man said, immediately putting away the worst of my worries. Then almost immediately a weird being made entirely of light appeared next to us. The being did not have a definite shape, and looking at it was like looking at the sun. It seemed to stand there and communicate with the suited man before leaving. With the snap of his fingers, the suited man teleported us away from that chamber, and we were now instead inside, what I could only guess, were one of the concrete buildings. There has been a mistake, Ethan, the man said in sorrow. What happened? I asked. And then suddenly the world started to warp around me, as if reality was a still body of water that was now rippling from an interruption. Colors started to swirl around like watercolor, and before I knew it, I found myself on the plane again with the sheet of rules clutched in my hand, and the same young man next to me. I'd been given a second chance, and this time, things would be a little different. I immediately looked away from the young man and ignored his cries for attention. I ignored the flight attendant too, and suddenly the whole cabin was yelling at me. Their shouts nearly caught my attention and made me turn around to tell them to just shut up, but I stayed put and stared at my lap. Suddenly the young man brought his head on my lap and stared directly into my eyes with those uncanny features. I could feel my heart in my throat as he slowly said in my mother's voice, "Ethan," he teased as his voice shifted from my mother's to my dad's and then to the voices of some of my friends. I trembled and tried to avoid completely disturbing features of his face, so close to me, by closing his eyes, which only made him angrier. It seems the creatures had no way to touch me until I acknowledged them though, so I was safe. The other rules were a breeze to follow except for the chaser one. The chaser was still Sarah, and she started to come towards me as soon as the hour started. I continued to run, but Sarah followed after me, calling for me. I tried to not get myself into a dead end, and continued looping around the seats until the hour passed. My legs were tired, and I was utterly defeated. Soon the captain made a landing announcement, and this time I managed to jump into the void. The void accepted me as it started to wrap its tendrils around me. All I could see was a thick, rich, velvety black as I fell, and fell for who knows how long. I started to hear the rhythmic beeping of some sort of machinery, and tried to focus on it until I realized what it was. I woke up in a hospital bed, covered from head to toe in casts. Apparently I had been involved in a serious car crash. The doctors say I was dead for a total of 3 minutes and miraculously survived. You might ask me why I didn't tell the doctors about my experience. They would never believe me. After years of rehab, I gained the ability to be able to do most things and life started to become normal again. That is, until the suited man visited me again. It was a cool Saturday evening, and I was going for a walk in the park to try and push myself to improve my health. My athletic ability hasn't been the same since the accident. He walked over to me, and I immediately froze as he held his hands up defensively in front of him to signify he meant no harm. I just want to explain some things, he offered sincerely. You were never supposed to go to hell, Ethan. It wasn't your time yet. When the soul's time comes, it is taken to hell in a sort of purgatory, you could say. It manifests differently depending on the person, and your own unique purgatory was the plane. The flight attendant that gave you the list of rules realized the error, and gave you the list to give you a chance to fight your way out of the purgatory and return to Earth. It was not in our power to return you ourselves, therefore you had to do it. I found you in hell unaccounted for, and was ready to put your soul at work when another higher being told me to send you back on the plane and give you a second chance so you could return, he explained. Cool, but why do you find the need to tell me that? I asked. Because this time, your time has come for real. And I see it a personal responsibility to finish off what we were on to last time, he said as his lips curled into a smile full of malice. I ran away from the man immediately, but I know my death is near. All I can tell you guys is, there is no heaven. Enjoy your life while you have it. I had been searching for a job for quite a while. My parents were getting sick of me, and they really wanted me to move out. About a week ago, I found the perfect job. It paid pretty well, and all I had to do was watch a camera feed and check on other guards every once in a while. I'm a night owl as well, so the night shift was perfect for me. I could read books, play games, scroll through social media, and basically do whatever I wanted as long as I did routine checks of them all. Much of the system was automated, and there were alarms everywhere, so I needed to pay little attention really. What surprised me was how much they were paying for the job. $65 per hour. I knew it was way too much for such a position. It seemed like a prank when I first saw the Facebook ad. Even the website seemed fake. Who names their security business entity Security Services? Other than the name of the business and the wage, everything seemed pretty legit, and so I applied for it. A couple of days later, I got a call from them. They took a basic interview from me over the phone, and they also asked about my health and physical fitness level. The last question they asked seemed a bit out there, but then also fit the position I was applying for. Are you able to work efficiently in stressful and life-threatening situations? I kind of paused at that one. The interviewer asked the question in such a serious tone. I was lost in my head for a moment before the interviewer brought me back to the call with a hello nudge. Yes, I believe I can handle possible scenarios that may occur at the mall. I wasn't so sure about my response, but I really didn't want to turn down such a good offer. What are the chances of the mall getting robbed by an armed gang anyways? The interviewer told me I'll get a response in a couple of days and hung up. Fast forward the next day, I got a call from the company again, and they told me I was chosen for the position. My first shift would have been the next night. It was a cold, rainy night. The rain relentlessly poured down on my windscreen as my wipers struggled to wipe it away. I shivered. I turned the heaters up all the way. The road was dark, and the only source of light were my headlights. Even the moon had been covered by the thick rain clouds. I was nearly there. I was super excited for my first shift, but also a touch nervous. The mall was a 30-minute drive from my house, and was in a remote location. The location of the mall made me slightly uneasy. My uneasiness increased when I arrived at the mall. It was an old, dark building. I navigated to the parking lot and zipped up my jacket as I stepped out of the car. I felt extremely vulnerable in the empty, vast parking lot. There was forest on either side of me, and the only road that led to here was the single big road that I used to drive here. I saw a couple of other cars in the parking lot as well. They were probably the other security guards. I ran to the mall entrance. The inside of the mall was just like the outside. Surely no one visited this mall. I spotted a couple of other people and started walking towards them. They all turned in my direction when they heard my footsteps on the marble floor. They introduced themselves as the other security guards. They were Andy. He seemed pretty excited for the job and wasn't nervous at all. He has worked in other remote locations too, and really likes night guard jobs. Marcus, he was a bit fidgety like me as this was his first job. Dylan, he was the introverted one out of all of us. He was quiet and shy and really only gave his name. We all waited for a manager or someone to arrive, but no one came. It was well past our starting time of 10 p.m. We decided to start our jobs when it was confirmed no one was going to turn up to tell us what to do. I made my way to the security room while the others took up their jobs. I felt pretty bad for Andy, who had to stand at the entrance, but he was getting paid double my wage. I got myself comfortable in the security room and scanned the 20 camera screens across the wall. I looked around in the room for some kind of manual on how to operate the systems and what everything meant. I wanted to do good on my first shift. As I picked up the tattered employee manual, a sheet of paper fell out of it. I picked up the small sheet of paper. I'll transcribe what it said here. Essential rules for employee safety on the premises. These rules must be followed under any circumstances. These rules are only for the security room employee. Other employees will get a similar set of rules. Failure to follow these rules will result in injury or loss of life. 1. Do not exit the security room unless it is time for your routine check. Rule 2. No matter what you see or hear, you must not leave the room. 2. Walk around the whole mall every hour. Your walk should not take any longer than 15 minutes. If you do find yourself still outside after 15 minutes, take shelter in one of the stores. 3. If you get a call on the phone in the security room, pick it up. If it is one of the employees that you met earlier, continue talking. Otherwise, hang up quickly. 4. If someone starts knocking on the door, hide in the toilet and lock the door until the knocking stops. Do not open the door under any circumstances. 5. During your routine checks, if you hear crying or laughter, immediately run back to the security room. 6. If you see a black figure on the cameras or during the routine checks, close your eyes immediately and turn around a corner. If you can't turn around a corner, keep your eyes closed and walk to the nearest store. If there is no store next to you, or if you see the figure on the cameras, lie down, count to 360, and then open your eyes. 7. You may see any sort of entity or disturbing occurrence on camera 9. You will be alerted to it by a high-pitched beep. As soon as you hear the beep, stare at the camera without looking away until it turns off by itself. You may see extremely disturbing things on camera, but you must not look away. 8. Towards the end of your shift, you may start feeling sleepy. It could be natural, but as a precaution, resist the urge to lie down and close your eyes no matter how strong it is. 9. Keep this sheet of paper with you. You'll need it to access Rule 10. It seemed like a prank on the new employee. I was about to throw away the sheet when I heard a high-pitched beep. I immediately looked up at camera 9 and saw something I'll never forget. A horrifying alien-like creature was eating Andy. It had yellow skin and unnaturally long limbs. Its limbs ended in not hands but razor-sharp points. It stabbed at Andy relentlessly and slowly consumed him with its gaping, bloody mouth. I struggled to hold my dinner in, and I desperately needed to look away. I was at the breaking point when the camera finally shut down. I turned around and puked violently into the rubbish bin. This isn't going to be a fun night. Just when I finished throwing up into the rubbish bin, I started to think rationally and grew worried for Andy. Was what I had seen on the camera just an elaborate prank on the new guy? It seemed way too real. The blood, the screams, the entity itself. I needed to get to the entrance of the mall and see what was happening. Just then, my eyes fell on the cursed rule sheet again, and my eyes fell on the very first rule. Do not exit the security room unless it is time for your routine check. I fought an internal battle within myself. The rational part of me told me that it was all just a prank. The instinctual and primitive part of me told me that something was seriously wrong here, and I had to follow the rules for my own safety. The distinct ring of the desk phone interrupted my conflicting thoughts. I picked the phone up. Hey, listen man, this is Andy. I can see this figure in the distance, dude. Could you check the car park cameras? I looked up at the car park cameras and saw nothing. Andy, are you okay? Oh shit, SHID. Richard, get out of here. I heard a low growl and the scream of Andy before the call cut off. I started hyperventilating. Somehow camera 9 showed me the future, and Andy was being eaten at the very moment. If this was a prank, it was a sick, disgusting one. This had gone too far. My gut feeling deep down told me to just follow the rules and come out of this mall alive. And so, for once in this entire week, I decided to listen to my gut instinct. I scanned the list of rules again and again until my watch let out a small beep. It was the hourly chime feature on my watch. I quickly realized I needed to do my first round of the mall. It was 12 a.m. I slowly opened the door of the security room, half expecting to get jumped by the same alien that ate Andy. I walked out into the dimly lit mall. The mall felt like a medieval castle at this point, except medieval castles were made of mostly hallways and corridors. Here the mall was just a vast open space. I'll try to give you guys a better description to really help you visualize the mall. Alright, let's start from the entrance. You have an average-sized parking lot at the front first. Walk through the parking, and you get to the front entrance, which is basically just a big glass double door that can be closed at night. Go inside, and you will find yourself in I wouldn't call it a hallway, because it's a pretty wide space. Continue walking through the hallway, and you get to the main square. The main square is basically a vast area. Shops line the edges of the main square, while the middle occupies the big spiral staircase leading up to the second story. There are also old elevators that lead to the second story. The lighting is terrible for a shopping mall, and most places are poorly lit. I guess if the shop lights were on the main square, it would definitely be brighter. Otherwise the square was drowned in shadows and darkness. It's a darkness in which you can still see, but you may mistake something for another thing. It's the type of darkness that makes you feel like some monster is right behind you. It's the unnerving type of darkness. It's the type of darkness in your closet when you mistake your coat for an unwelcome home intruder. While you can still see the coat in the darkness, that darkness masks it and makes it look like something else. That's the kind of darkness I'm talking about. Climb up the staircase and you get to the second floor. The second floor is an exact replica of the main square, along with the same lighting issues. The middle, however, is cut out, and you can actually overlook most of the main square along with the entrance if you lean over the edge. My security room is quite discreet. You have to go to the right of the second story, and you'll find a discreet door in the corner leading to my security room via another flight of stairs. I can also access the security room from the first floor through the same flight of stairs. The roof of the mall is basically just an open glass canopy. I assume the mall would look great during the day, but at night it's a creepy place. I hope I haven't confused you too much with the description, and you got a somewhat clear picture in your head. Now imagine taking a stroll around this mall at 12 a.m. That's exactly what I was doing. So I walked out of the only place that I deemed safe in the entire mall, the security room. As I stepped out into the barren mall, chills ran up my spine. I crossed my arms and hugged myself, thinking I was just cold. The air was cool and empty here. My eyes slowly adjusted to the new dimly lit conditions, and I started walking around the second story first, just staring into each store. I jumped at every shadow and sound. As I walked past one of the stores, I heard a loud crash. It made me jump back as my heart started pounding violently in my chest. My veins were full of adrenaline, and I swear I could have beat the world's fastest athletes then. I looked directly in the direction of the sound and noticed that some items had just fallen over. I sighed in relief and dismissed the incident when a thought suddenly blossomed in my already panic-stricken mind. Why did the items fall over just as I was near them? Is this just a coincidence? Countless thrillers and horror movies I had watched came up in my mind, and I suddenly thought a serial killer was out there lurking to get me. It was way worse than that. My ears picked up a faint crying sound from the store, and I immediately looked over. A ghostly white tall woman emerged from the rows. I was frozen in fear. She was extremely tall. Her eyes lacked pupils and were a milky white color. She had a round mouth lined with blood-stained razor-sharp teeth. The rest of her face was pale and flawless. She didn't seem to have a nose. Her dirty black hair hung at either side, and she seemed to be wearing some sort of gown. Every single one of my muscles were frozen, and my heart nearly popped out of my chest in each beat. My vision swam. I tried to scream, but my voice caught up in my throat. Every single cell in my body screamed for me to run away, but my muscles were locked. The creepy woman then pulled out a knife from her abdomen and started charging at me. That caused me to snap awake quickly. I ran so fast my PE teacher would have shed tears of joy. I felt her putrid breath on my neck, but I didn't dare turn back. I ran into the security room and slammed the door shut. I locked it. Crimson blood oozed out from the gap under the door slowly. I screamed and jumped right back. Suddenly, I heard the regular ring of the desk phone. I picked it up. Hey, this is the police. We received an emergency call from this location. Yes, please come, I need help. Then the person on the other line said the following in such a malicious and demonic voice that shivers ran down my spine. It isn't that easy to get out of here. Then suddenly my ear felt wet. I pulled the receiver away to see that a thin coal-black hand had somehow come out of it. The hand looked like it had been severely burnt. It suddenly moved forward and extended further. Its sharp claws clawed at my ear. I lost a bit of my ear and felt an intense stinging pain in the area. I threw the receiver away as my vision blurred with the tears in my eyes. The hand retreated back into the receiver with the bit of my ear it took. Suddenly I heard the high-pitched beep again. I cradled one side of my head to try to stop the blood flow from my ear when I heard the high-pitched beep once again. I immediately looked up at camera 9 and watched as the screen came back to life. I saw Marcus on the camera, and he looked nervous as ever while patrolling the first floor. I watched as his face suddenly turned to a face of absolute fear. Somehow the camera changed angles, and now I could see what he was looking at. He saw the same white-gowned lady that I had just dealt with, staring at him from the shadows of a store. She stuck out like a sore thumb in the shadows of the shop. Marcus was frozen just like me, and the lady walked over towards him. She pulled out the knife embedded in her abdomen and slowly walked towards him. Marcus became unstuck like me and started running, but suddenly he stopped. The camera angle switched again, and I saw a grinning Dylan holding Marcus as he struggled to run free. Dylan was bigger and leaner than Marcus, and it seemed impossible that he would get away. I felt helpless as I watched the camera. Dylan started laughing, even though I couldn't hear it. I felt chill go down my spine. He grinned wide from ear to ear, unnaturally wide. His face froze in that grin, and his eyes were wide and hungry. The lady slowly walked up to Marcus and stabbed him, again and again. The screams were so loud I could hear them from my security rooms. I shuddered in my seat and tears started rolling down my face, but I continued watching the camera feed. His screams finally died down and his body slumped down. Dylan let go and his body slid down onto the floor like jelly. Dylan then put his fingers on either side of his grin and ripped open his skin. His skin peeled away like tape. I felt the urge to vomit again, but my stomach was empty. My eyes got watery and I grew nauseous. Dylan ripped all his skin off to reveal a totally different creature. He was still a human, just skinned. I could see all his muscles, organs, and veins. He then bent down and started to eat Marcus's body. The lady with the knife smiled and disappeared off screen. The camera finally flickered off. As soon as the camera turned off, I gasped massive gulps of air, realizing that I had held my breath the whole time. I then started crying hysterically and kicking at the walls. I felt hopeless. My mind flooded with thoughts of how I was about to die here. Suddenly, I heard a knock on my door. My mind quickly came back to the situation, and I was on alert. "Hey Richard, it's me Dylan. There's this weird thing outside. Please let me in." I gasped and quickly hid in the toilet and locked the door to it. Dylan started knocking again, and his voice grew more frantic. I put my hands over my ears and tried my best to ignore him. He then started kicking and ramming himself into the door. I flinched every time I heard the door bang and prayed for the door to stay strong. Luckily the door held and the bangs subsided. I cautiously made my way out of the bathroom and collapsed in the chair. My watch chimed again, telling me that it was 1 a.m. In no way was I going out into the mall after that. I decided to skip the round. Just this one. 5 minutes ticked by in absolute silence. I started laughing in relief. That's when the first hand popped out. It slid right out of the wall like the wall was a pool of water. Imagine you pulling your hand out from underwater. That's exactly how it appeared to come out of the wall. I jerked back immediately. More hands appeared from every wall, and they reached for me. They were hungry for me. They reached further and further, wanting to grasp my skin. I backed off as more and more hands appeared from the walls, the roof, and the floor. I screamed as one of them touched me with their slimy, wet grip. I ran out of the security room. So not following this rule really had its consequences. I strained my eyes to see in the dark and slowly made my way around the second floor. I decided not to go to the first floor to be safe. I felt very vulnerable in the open space as unknown shadows surrounded me. I felt like every shadow was going to jump at me. Suddenly, I felt a very strong presence behind me. I looked behind and saw nothing but shadows and the faint outline of them all. I felt the presence again. I turned my whole body quickly and saw nothing once again. My heart rate rose to levels I didn't know were possible, and I stood still. I felt a faint breath on the back of my neck and turned around to come face to face with Dylan. I whimpered and jumped backwards. I somehow tripped on myself and fell to the floor. Dylan grinned at me in the same way. His skin was back on again though. He started leaning down to pick me up while laughing. I kicked him in the face and quickly strangled up to my feet. Dylan was still in shock at what had happened. In my adrenaline-filled state, I kicked Dylan's in the groin while simultaneously punching him at the side of the neck. These were some of the moves I had learned from when I used to do mixed martial arts in my teens. Looks like all the practice really did help and muscle memory was real. I then quickly shoved him backwards against the railing. I quickly pushed him over the railing, and he fell to the first floor with a scream. He landed with a thud on the hard marble floor. Blood pooled around his head. He stared up at me with lifeless eyes. My watch then started beeping, and I realized I had screwed up. My 15 minutes for the round was over. The shadows transformed into silhouettes, and soon multiple black figures were surrounding me. They all howled in unison. The black figures howled as they came closer and closer. They surrounded me just like the shadows had. I started feeling claustrophobic, and I struggled to take breaths. Suddenly I got a dangerous idea. I debated whether I should do it or not, but as soon as one of the black figures touched me, I made up my mind. Their touch was icy, so cold my shoulder still feels numb. It felt like someone had spilt liquid nitrogen on it. I leapt over the edge of the railing. Even the black figures were shocked. They stopped howling as they watched me flail in the air. I landed hard on all fours and heard a distinct snap in my left ankle. I then collapsed further, and my body thumped against the marble floor. Luckily, most of my body broke my fall and absorbed the force, but my head still came down hard on the marble floor. My nose hit first, followed by my forehead. I'm surprised I didn't break my nose. I felt pain shoot up all through my head, and I saw stars. My vision tunneled and narrowed. I was about to pass out, but I kept myself awake. My whole body was bruised and battered. The air was still knocked out of my lungs. I forced my muscles to work, but they only screamed in response. I heard the howling of the black figures again. Somehow this made me motivated to get out. I willed my body to get up. My entire body hurt like hell, but I didn't succumb to the pain. I kinda dragged my left leg and quickly ran to the security room access door from the first floor. Climbing the steps was like hell with my ankle, and I was about to give up, but luckily I made it. As soon as I made it inside the security room, I dropped onto the floor and just lay down for a bit. My chest went up and down in an even rhythm as I thought about how I was going to get out of here. I checked the time on my watch. 3 a.m. The hands hadn't come from the walls, so it looked like I was getting a break from the routine walks. I rolled over onto my right side so I could lay out my angle and have it rest on the floor. Suddenly, a glint of an object under the table caught my eye. I reached my hand out and found out that it was a small lighter. I tried to use it, and sure enough a flame erupted from it. I also found another not under the table. I'll transcribe it here. Hopefully you have found this just when you needed it. Rule 10 is a risky and dangerous rule that should only be acted upon if you are under extreme danger, and there is absolutely no other escape. Rule 10 has a higher chance of being successful in the later hours of the shift, as well, which is why we did not give the rule to you immediately. We hope you understand our concerns. This lighter will help you access Rule 10. By the time you figure out how to access Rule 10 with the lighter, it will be the late hours of your shift, and it will also be the optimum time to put Rule 10 into action if needed. Lemon juice is your best friend. I was so confused by the last line. Lemon juice? I thought. This was probably a code for someone's name. I started thinking about what lemon juice could mean when I heard the high-pitched beep once more. I looked up at camera 9 and saw the black figures surrounding me outside. Basically what I had just experienced was replaying on camera 9. The black figures came closer and closer, but in this tape, I didn't jump off. I stayed there and crouched low and put my hands over my head. The black figures started prodding at me. My skin melted with each of their probes and slowly rolled down like wax. Soon my organs were melting and rolling down. The last thing I saw before the screen fully went black was me slowly turning into a puddle of water. I dry heaved into the rubbish bin and had a few sips of water from the water bottle. I then picked up my phone and started searching for uses and other names for lemon juice. I needed to get out of here. Soon my watch chimed again, telling me it was 4 a.m. Only 4 more hours until the end of my shift. I cautiously went outside and brought the lighter with me for protection. Taking a round in the mall this time was worse. It was a totally different experience. I heard whispers all around me. It was like someone was gossiping about me in one corner of the mall. They were audible enough to hear, but not to understand. I caught mere syllables of the visibles, but when I did hear a word, it sent chills down my spine. Melts. Rip. Eat. Richard. I stopped when I heard my name. I saw figures in my peripheral vision. I looked sharply to my sides, but saw nothing. They were always in my peripheral vision, but never in my reach. I checked my watch. For 10. I started walking back to the security room. when I saw a black figure right in front of me. It was of a deep black color, the color when there is a total absence of light. It was a mesmerizing color, darker than the shadows themselves. It stood out. It looked like the total absence of matter, like someone had cut a human-shaped hole in space-time itself. I stared at it for a little too long until I realized I was closing my eyes. I quickly closed my eyes and blindly ran for the next shop. My already hurt ankle smashed against a shelf, and I fell onto the floor. I hoped I was in a shop, and I just lay still and prayed that I had made it inside the shop. I counted to 360 while lying still and waiting. Suddenly my eyes grew droopy, and I felt extremely sleepy. My muscles all relaxed into a deeply relaxed state, and my head was foggy. My mind urged me to relax, and just lay down for a bit more. I opened my eyes and closed them again. My eyelids were too heavy. I think I just need a bit of sleep. I struggled for a bit before I finally let the urge to sleep take over me. I had no fight left in me, and sleep was a blissful option. If I had to die tonight, I'd die sleeping. As my consciousness drained out of my body, the last thing I saw before I completely closed my eyes were black figures surrounding me. By then my brain didn't even register them as danger, and I was in the dream world. I woke up in the security room. I checked the time immediately upon waking up. 6 a.m. Shit! I realized that I had fallen asleep for 2 hours. I broke the rules and I waited for the consequences. I unlocked my phone and realized I had posted my last post before falling asleep. I read through the comments and saw the frantic comments that urged me to wake up. I'm sorry I did you guys like that. Suddenly my eyes widened when I saw you / Phantom Rogers comment. Lemon juice can be used as an invisible writing. Try using the lighter and heat up the rules paper. Rule 10 should appear. I had hit the jackpot. I quickly pulled out both the rule sheet and the lighter. Before something happened in the security room, I needed to get out of here. I lit the lighter and cautiously waved it over the rule sheet. I made sure to not burn the sheet, but also heat it up adequately. I was about to lose hope when I saw the faint outlines of brown letters on the underside of the sheet. I brought the lighter closer, and the letters appeared clearer. I'll transcribe what it said. Rule 10. Now you'll realize why this rule was hidden. It is only to be used as a last resort. Let's say you fell asleep during your shift. That's when you must use this rule. If you don't, you will die a horrible death in the mall. You have around 15 minutes upon your awakening to utilize this rule. If you don't manage to follow this rule in 15 minutes, the mall will never let you out. You should have woken up in the security room. Now climb up the stairs to the roof of the mall and jump off. Try to jump off from the back side of the mall and land on the grass of the forest surrounding the mall. Hopefully that'll cushion your fall and minimize injury. Try to land on all fours. We will collect you soon. By now I knew that I must follow the rules. I haven't always been too good with heights, but I needed to do this. I got up and flinched when I put weight on my ankle. I slowly climbed up the stairs. I checked my watch. 6:07 a.m. I have tons of time. I made it to the roof and then slowly started walking over to the edge of the roof. There was still a raised fence type area on the roof, so I had to carefully move myself over it. I moved myself over the ledge and looked down. My heart nearly jumped out of my throat. I was very, very, very high up. My legs were dangling off the edge. I noped out and started to move back onto the roof. I would die from the fall. Suddenly, I saw the black figures emerging from the roof exit I had come from just minutes ago. They were hungry for me, and they howled as they moved closer. They slowly surrounded me, and I was torn between two options. Jump the roof, or face the figures. My instinct got the better of me, and I quickly swung myself over the edge and jumped. Time slowed down. I slowly watched the unforgiving hard ground come closer to my feet. I frantically moved my hands, trying to fly like a bird, but gravity didn't give up. I looked up and saw the black figures looking down at me over the edge. I looked down again, and the ground was not so far away. My legs hit first. I heard multiple cracks. My knees were next, and then my hands. I felt my wrists shatter at the impact. A twig impaled my right shin. My whole body burned in pain for my final few moments before my head also hit the ground, and it all went black. I woke up to the rhythmic beeps of hospital machines. My vision was blurry, and my entire body was aching. My head was foggy, and I couldn't think straight. I heard a TV somewhere above me. Shopping mall caught fire. Security guard had to jump off the roof to save himself. I heard snippets of an interview, but I couldn't recall anything, and I fell unconscious once again. When I woke up properly, my whole body was in pain. The anesthetics had worn off, and my head was clear. Most of my body was in a cast, but the doctors told me I'd make a full recovery in a couple of months. I found a $10,000 check on my table. They paid me more than double my rate. Soon my family came in, and they asked me how I was. Apparently the mall had caught fire, and I had jumped off to save myself. I tried to tell them what had actually happened, but they gave me concerned looks. They called a doctor in. I have figured out that they think my memory has been messed up due to the concussion I had. The $10,000 was apparently a donation from the security company, and they also paid all my hospital fees. I finally managed to get my phone off my mom and saw a message. We're glad you're doing well. We believe you have the ability to now be a permanent member of our security team at the mall. We will pay you a rate of $75 per hour and will cover your medical bills. This time you will be working at the entrance of the mall. The details of your next shift will be given to you when you recover. Also remember, we have Dylan's body. A heat wave had hit my town. For the last 2 nights, it was over 30°C, 86°F. As a broke college student, my small apartment didn't have an air conditioner nor ceiling fans. The cheap fan I had bought wasn't enough to drive away the heat. I constantly rolled around all night, sweating, unable to sleep from the heat. I tried wearing wet clothes. They cooled me down but didn't help with sleeping. I tried putting a wet cloth over my fan. The only thing that did was completely block out the already low amount of air the fan gave. I was sick of it. For the 3rd night in a row, as I rolled round and round in bed, beads of sweat dripping down my forehead, I tried to think of another solution. All the previous failed ideas passed through my mind mocking me. Then it struck me. It was a quite simple method actually. I was surprised it hadn't occurred to me before. The solution was easy: move my bed next to the window. I was on the 3rd floor, so it was quite windy up here. My window had a bug screen too. Mosquitoes wouldn't be an issue. It was a large window. I started dreaming of the pleasant wind cooling down my body as I slept. I got up and checked my phone. It was around 12 a.m. I turned on the lights and started moving my old single bed to the other corner of the room. After a couple of pushes and grunts, my bed was now against the window. I was already covered in sweat from just 5 minutes of work. I jumped into the bed and lay down after turning off the lights. The heavenly cool wind came in from the window and drove the heat away from my body. I had left the muggy hot environment of my room and was now in a cool air-conditioned room. The window was set pretty low, so it was almost level with my body. All the air from the window directly hit my body. The window was also almost the length of my body, so most of my body, except for my legs, got the cool air. It was the perfect environment, and after 2 nights of no sleep, I was already drifting off. I woke up to a weird sound in the middle of the night. It was a high-pitched whistle-like sound. I rubbed my sleepy eyes and strained to see in the dark. My mind was still half asleep, and all my thoughts were foggy and muddled up. I heard the whistle again. I got my phone from under my pillow and checked the time. Exactly 3 a.m. I heard the whistle again. It was closer this time. Chills ran up my spine. I immediately sat up and looked out of the window. A horrible creature awaited me. At first I thought it was a crow. Then my eyes focused on it more. It was a demented-looking woman with black wings. Her long, messy hair was all over her face. Her crazed green eyes glinted in the moonlight. She was wearing a tattered black gown. Her hands and legs ended in overgrown bird's claws. Her face was disturbing. Her mouth was shaped like a beak. She had lips and teeth, though. Her legs were like those of a bird. She looked at me in the eye and made that high-pitched whistle again. She suddenly swooped right for me. It happened in the blink of an eye. 1 second she was far away. The next she had her hands and legs wrapped around my torso. She tried to pull me out through the window. Luckily my body was larger than the window, and I didn't fit through. Her razor-sharp claws dug right into my flesh. She continued pulling, and I started screaming in agony. I'm surprised I didn't wake the neighbors up. Suddenly chunks of my flesh ripped out from my torso, and she lost her grip. My eyes welled with tears, and my vision grew blurry. Pain seared through my entire torso, and I nearly blacked out. I stumbled out of the bed and locked myself in the bathroom. I'm currently sitting in my bathroom typing this out. I can still hear the damn whistle sound. I can hear her claws scratching against the wood door. I can see the wood slowly splintering. I'm posting this as a warning to everyone. It was a Friday afternoon. Online class was as usual taking forever to finish. The teacher was droning on and on about something I don't remember anymore. I think it was a maths class. Anyways, that's not why I'm typing this out. To describe how boring online class is. I'm typing this out to warn you guys not to slack off. I couldn't help but glance at the time down at the bottom of my screen every couple of minutes. The time ticked agonizingly slowly, and I couldn't help but think about other things I could be doing right now. So I did what most students would do in online class. I muted my online class, but kept it running in the background. I started up COD and started playing. While my teacher thought I was listening in class, I was actually enjoying myself playing COD. I don't know how long I played for before I suddenly got a ping from Microsoft Teams. I checked the time. 20 minutes had passed since I had been playing COD. I quickly switched over to Microsoft Teams and unmuted the meeting. Turns out my teachers had been trying to get me to respond for some time. "What were you doing, Adam? You need to pay attention in class," the teacher told me with a very frustrated look on his face. I apologized and turned off my mic again. The teacher continued the lesson, but I didn't care at all, so I switched back to COD and continued playing. I played for so long, I didn't even realize my meeting had long ended. I asked my friend for his notes, and he sent them as usual. I was going to pass my exams without even paying attention in class. I played games the rest of the day and watched a bit of TV before I went to sleep. I was playing COD once again during online class. Suddenly, I got a notification once again. I quickly switched back to online class. I immediately sensed that something was wrong. I felt a sinking feeling in my stomach. My heart rate quickened and I felt nauseous. Everyone was staring at me. 20 pairs of eyes refocused on me. My classmates had impossibly wide grins on their faces. I could see all their teeth. The teacher was staring at me too. His eyes were bulging out of his sockets. Blood was running down his face slowly like tears. His eyes were bloodshot. He had a wide smile on his face. It went from ear to ear. He reached out for me. His hand came out of the screen like the screen was merely a window. I was frozen in fear. His cold fingers curled around my throat. He tightened his grip. My body was slowly losing air. My face felt warm and my chest burned. I felt like I was being crushed. My body was running out of oxygen and I could do nothing about it. It felt like his hands were crushing my heart instead. I kicked and struggled, but the hands didn't let go. My vision blurred. I suddenly felt lightheaded. I stopped struggling. I couldn't formulate any thoughts. I couldn't make a sound. I woke up gasping for air. My sheets were drenched in sweat. The dream was way too real. I could still feel the hands gripping on my neck. I touched my neck. The skin felt tender and it hurt. I turned on my lamp and looked at my neck with my phone's selfie camera. My neck was bruised. Suddenly the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I looked up instantly and saw a figure in the corner of my room. It was a tall figure. I recognized it. See, sir? Mr. Chandra walked from the corner of the room towards me. I was frozen in fear. The next thing I remember is seeing all black. He's making me type this up right now. I don't know what will happen to me after I hit the post button. Consider this a warning. Please don't slack off during online class. I recently moved from a small apartment to a bigger flat, and I bought lots of furniture to decorate the house. I also bought this brand new white standing lamp off eBay, as it was significantly cheaper than all the other ones I could find. The lamp had hundreds of positive reviews, and the seller also had very high reviews. Plus I could get the lamp delivered the next day for free. It was a golden deal, and so I didn't think twice about buying it. Fast forward the next day, and I had bought 2 of them to place in the living room. The lamps were made of thick white poles that had the lamps placed at the top and a tripod stand at the bottom. I installed the bulbs that came in the box and quickly had both lamps up and running on either side of the living room. The lampshades perfectly dispersed the warm yellow light all over the living room. I stepped back and admired them. I then turned them off and went to my bedroom to go to sleep as it was already pretty late. In the morning, when I walked into the living room, I noticed creases on the lamp folds. It's hard to describe. The lamp poles were normal, but in some areas, it looked like the paint layer had folded over itself and formed a kind of crease as it returned back to its position. I logged into eBay immediately and wrote an email to the seller, inquiring about the issue. Afterwards, I pretty much forgot about it and went to work. I didn't pay much attention to the lamps when I came back from work either, as I was exhausted, and I just watched TV and then went to bed. On day 2, the creases now covered the entire length of the pole, and formed some sort of pattern of creases. Some parts of the pole appeared to be swollen. The appearance of the standing lamps sent chills down my spine as I stared at the deformities they had grown over 2 days. What was perhaps more disturbing was the fact that the creases and deformities on both lamps were in similar places, if not almost identical. I logged onto eBay and immediately requested a refund. Not because I was unsatisfied with the lamps, but because I was starting to genuinely be afraid of them. My most primal instincts told me to immediately get rid of these 2 lamps. I wish I had listened to my gut feeling earlier. Instead, I let them be and just went to sleep. That night I had a dream about the lamps. I was standing in my living room, and the lamps appeared to be changing. Slow fluctuations in the shape of their poles quickly turned into big growths. They grew thick shoulders and then hands. The tripod stand reformed into 3 legs. The lamps skittered towards me like deformed spiders. I was frozen in fear, and I could not move. They came closer and closer. Sharp points grew out of their defined limbs, and they started to push into me. I felt the sharp points pierce my skin as the poles both squeezed me between them in a hug. I felt my bones getting crushed and felt the blood being squeezed out of my veins. I woke up covered in cold sweat. My heart thumped in my chest like a scared rabbit. I quickly sat upright and took a large gulp from the glass of water on my bedside table. Beads of sweat ran down my forehead. I had to check on the lamps just to be sure. In my semi-asleep state, nothing made sense. I quickly got out of my bed and walked over to the living room. I turned on the lights and saw that the lamps had completely changed overnight. They had grown grotesque limbs. I watched as they took off their lampshades. The bulbs I had installed with my very own hands had turned into grotesque heads. They had eyes and a mouth, but no nose. They walked towards me. I stood frozen in fear, unable to process what I was seeing. The lamps were barely a meter away from me when I quickly snapped back into action. Adrenaline rushed through my veins. Before the lamps could get any closer, I turned around and ran for my bedroom. I locked the door after me. I've been sitting here for 30 minutes now. The lamps are constantly banging on the door. I don't know how long my door will last, or how long I will last. I slowly opened my eyes and stared at the flecks of dust floating in the air, illuminated by the sharp beams of sunlight from my blinds. I turned around to now lay flat on my back and noticed the footsteps on my ceiling once more. They were like charcoal on white sheets. It looked as if someone had stepped in soot barefoot and then walked all over my ceiling. The prints themselves seemed to belong to an adult. They made a trail around my ceiling before disappearing completely at a certain point, leaving no explanation for how they were made. I vividly remember the first morning I saw them. My chest felt empty as a strong sense of unease coursed through my veins, leaving my throat dry. I gulped down the glass of water on my bedside table. I couldn't sleep in my room the next few nights. They appeared every day until I grew desensitized to them. The phenomenon was now just another repressed thought in the back of my head throughout the day. My fresh fear from the first day had dampened to just a worrying thought. I accepted the footsteps as part of my day and didn't think much of them until last night, when I finally got to see what was making these footsteps. I went to bed as normal that night, not giving as much as a thought to the footsteps. After 10 minutes of rolling around in bed, I managed to fall into a deep sleep. At some point in the night, however, I was roused awake by a strong itching sensation on my face. I was still half asleep at this point and didn't process anything. I lifted my hand and tried to scratch my face when I felt strands of what felt like hair touch my fingertips. A deep primal instinct took over me, and I clawed at the hair with both my hands frantically. I made the mistake of opening my eyes to try to see something only for all the hair to go into my eyes. A moaning sound from above me stopped me in my tracks and made the blood in my veins turn to ice. I froze and strained my ears to listen to any other sound apart from my ravaging heartbeat. The hair slowly slid off my face as I heard thudding footsteps on the ceiling. The dots slowly connected in my head as I realized what was happening. With a shaky hand I reached out and turned on my bedside lamp to light up my room and get a better view of the dark figure I could now see on my ceiling. As the light illuminated my room, chills ran up my spine. There was a woman, at least that's what it looked like, although I doubt the thing was even human, standing upside down on my ceiling. Her face was devoid of any features except for 2 large black eyes that reminded me of a bird's eyes. Those eyes were empty and devoid of life, like the glass eyes on a mannequin, yet stared right through my soul. She was dressed in a dirty white gown that seemed to defy gravity. It looked like someone had just flipped her upside down, but gravity had not taken its effect yet. The only part of her that seemed to be affected by gravity was her hair, which hung low from her head. I backed up against the wall as the thing stepped closer to me. Adrenaline coursed in my veins as the strong desire to stay away from this anomaly bloomed in my gut. The thing moaned again and came closer to me. It was at this moment that an animalistic instinct of survival overcame me, and I lashed out. The thing now startled stepped backwards. I continued to scream and lash at the thing, and it went further and further back, probably recomposing itself before cornering me again like a predator readying itself to catch its prey. As it stepped backwards, though, I heard a loud cracking sound that sent chills up my spine, a sound that I would later learn to be the sound of flesh hitting the dull metal blades of my ceiling fan. The creature let out an ear-piercing shriek before falling down from the ceiling. I looked up and noticed that its legs were still attached to the ceiling, but were now clear of the spinning fan blades. The creature writhed in agony as I ran over it and called 911 quickly. By the time the police came, only the legs of the creature were left attached to the ceiling, while the rest of the creature had seemingly disappeared in thin air. My case was obviously moved to the higher ranks, as over the course of the week several tough-looking men visited my house and interviewed me, and also searched my house. I don't know much about the creature, but I heard the higher-ups talking about how the creature seemed to have weaker flesh and no bone, which is why my ceiling fan was able to cut through it. They made me sign several non-disclosure documents and a couple of others that I barely read. It was apparent that I must sign these papers or I would be silenced. You may be wondering that I'm risking a great deal by sharing my story here. The thing is, I wouldn't have told my story until what happened this morning. This morning when I woke up, I saw something on my roof that brought back the same terror from that night. I buckled my seatbelt with sweaty hands as the steady hum of the plane engine filled the quiet atmosphere of the cabin. The pilot announced that the plane would launch, and soon the gentle G-force pressed into my chest as the plane accelerated. My heart thudded against my chest as I felt the plane lift from the ground. It was an all too familiar sensation of a deep pit in my stomach. I swallowed several times as the plane ascended at a steady rate further and further away from the sweet, solid ground. I had been so nervous and transfixed during the launch that I hadn't even noticed another person had sat down next to me. I quickly recomposed myself and took deep breaths to calm myself down. Visions of the plane crashing flashed in my mind. The flight would be a slow mental torture for hours on end until I finally, hopefully, safely landed. The young man sitting next to me fiddled with the flight entertainment unit in front of him and looked through their movie catalog. I was impressed with his calm composure, but then looked around and realized that everyone else was also relaxed. Was I the only one being paranoid? I looked outside the window for the first time and saw the fluffy white clouds. Being so high up made me feel like my stomach was still left back on the ground, but I couldn't help admire the beauty of the clouds. They were nice fluffy whisks that looked like cotton candy. I could imagine them as incredibly soft and comfortable. I stared into the window a bit more, but soon looking at the same clouds got incredibly boring, and so I decided to finally take a look at the screen in front of me and try to find something to do for the remainder of the flight. While my nerves had subsided for the most bit, I still had that nagging thought at the back of my mind warning me to be more alert. I suddenly saw a sudden movement through the window in my peripheral vision. I whipped my head around as my heartbeat started to rise again and realized that the sky was no longer visible. The gentle blue color of the sky that reminded me of bright mornings by the beach and the pure white color of the clouds was now gone. In place of it was a murky black void that shifted and moved like TV static. The outside world had seemingly disappeared, and in place was now an ever-shifting blanket of inky black static. It seemed I was the first to notice it, but soon I heard more gasps in the cabin, and everyone had realized the sudden change. I started to have a panic attack once more and started hyperventilating. I buried my face into my arms and tried to disappear, to somehow get away from this plane, to be back at home safe and sound. Flight attendants came around and were bombarded with questions they had no answers to. People wanted to know what had happened. A new wave of panic spread over the cabin. The outside stayed the same. Just an inky black static. The pilot announced over the speaker system that they had lost communication over radio, and that no matter how much they maneuvered the plane, they could not find a way out of this storm. For the next 15 minutes, the cabin was dead silent except for the steady hum of the plane engine that matched the static outside the window and the occasional whimper of a child. The young man next to me was the first one to get out of his seat and try to make sense of our situation. He walked over to the pilot's cabin, but not soon after he was escorted back to his seat by the flight attendants. The captain announced that he wanted everyone to stay in their seats and that the plane would soon be out of the storm. I checked my phone to note the time and noticed that the time hadn't changed at all. I confirmed this with the digital time on my flight entertainment unit and confirmed that the time hadn't changed for the past 20 or so minutes. I decided to keep this to myself as I didn't want to worry anyone else, but it was inevitable that other people would figure out. Soon the cabin was filled with hushed tones as people conversed about the absurdity of our situation. It once more felt like everyone had been lulled into a strange sense of security, as nothing had so far happened outside of the cabin. The calmness spread through the whole cabin, and I stared out into the void, not exactly sure what I was looking for. The void shifted slightly constantly, but it remained the same for as long as I stared at it. The void consumed my vision and started to extend into my peripherals until it felt like the void surrounded me. The hum of the plane engine and the sounds in the cabin no longer existed. It was just me and the void. Suddenly I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I snapped out of it. It was once again the young man next to me. "What were you looking at?" "Just at what's outside, you know. You've been staring for the past 20 minutes. "No man, I just looked into it for like 2 minutes. "You were staring at it for a long time for sure." I was puzzled. To me it felt like I was only staring at it for a solid minute, yet the young man kept insisting that I had been transfixed on the void, like a little kid watching his favorite cartoon for a long time. I looked around and noticed that the atmosphere in the cabin had changed as well. Everyone was messing around with their flight entertainment units, not really paying much attention to the void. Suddenly I heard a woman shout, "There's something there!" Everyone immediately stopped what they were doing and shifted their attention to the woman staring out her window into the void. She continued staring while repeating her phrase over and over again, like she was trying to create some sort of demented echo. "I need to see it closer." She got out of her seat and headed straight for the doors of the plane. The flight attendants quickly rushed over to her to stop her, but she pushed them out of her way with inhuman strength. Her eyes were glazed over, and she was staring at a point far away as she opened the plane door effortlessly and jumped out into the black void. There was no pressure drop in the plane as the door was opened. The flight attendants and several passengers walked after the woman to try and save her, but it was too late. She had disappeared into the void the second she stepped in. The flight attendants closed the plane door, and everyone was ordered to sit tight in their seats. The windows of the plane were sealed by blinds, and a deathly silence overtook the whole cabin. The only sound that occasionally broke the grueling silence was the voice of the only child on the flight. It seemed as if everyone was silently mourning the loss of the woman. A deep dread started to build up in my stomach as I started to think about how I would ever get out of this flight. Minutes turned into hours and hours turned into days. The only thing we could see outside the window if we pulled the blind up for a few seconds was the same ever-shifting black void. Every time I secretly opened the window to see it when the flight attendants weren't looking, it drew me to its beauty. I was mesmerized by that ever-changing undulating fabric that seemed to be the essence of space-time itself. Time would pass in the blink of an eye when I would stare at it, and before I even realized someone would be tapping me on the shoulder telling me to snap out of it. Food shortages ensued and panic rose as people started to realize that the plane would most likely never make it out of this place. The excess of time gave way to our minds to come up with far-fetched theories of how the plane possibly made it here. It was evident that we had somehow phased out of our reality and ended up in nothingness. By the second or third day, not that I could keep track of time here, a huge fight erupted in the cabin. It was a trivial matter. A man had reclined his seat, and the person behind him didn't like it. At first it was loud arguing before the sounds of smacking filled up the cabin. Everyone watched as the two men beat each other up until one of them fell. The flight attendants tried to stop the fight, but they got into it and were injured as well. The fight didn't ensue for too long and ended with the flight attendants separating the two men. It was starting to become apparent that the isolation and boredom in the cabin was starting to get to our heads. A long time after that, when the food supplies ran out and everyone was starving, people started to look out their windows for long periods of time, as everyone knew time would pass by quickly staring at that immersive black void. Soon after, the pilots walked straight out of the plane. After a long time, possibly weeks, a new sound filled the cabin. There were only 5 people left in the cabin at this point who hadn't walked straight out of the plane to meet with the void. One of them was a flight attendant, while the rest were passengers, including me. It was a high-pitched shriek that made my ears ring. I pulled up the blind from my window and looked out of it. I saw bird-like creatures flying in the void next to us. My heart rate peaked and chills ran down my spine. These creatures were otherworldly. They seemed to be made of the same black fabric as the void, yet stood out in such a way that it seemed as if they had been superimposed on a photo. The static on their skin was much noisier than the static in the black void, and that's what made them stand out. I started to hear powerful thuds on the plane as the mighty birds attacked the plane. The plane was an imposter in the black void, and it seemed as if the birds had taken it upon themselves to destroy it. The heavy glass of the plane started to crack and shatter as the birds relentlessly banged their long beaks and bodies against the plane. Panic ensued in the cabin as people started to run around and cower in various places of the cabin. I ran to the pilot's cabin, to which the door had been left opened. It was this split-second decision that probably saved my life. I observed the cabin through the little peephole in the door. The birds had made their way inside after breaking through and ripping the walls of the plane like they were paper, and were starting to shred the people inside the cabin apart as well. It's really hard to describe, but it almost seemed like the black void started to spill inside the cabin like it was a liquid. The plane cabin was absorbed into the black void, and soon all I could see through the peephole was the same inky black void. The birds started to shriek in a different note as their deep hunger and blood lust had been satisfied. In the blink of an eye, the black void was gone and was replaced by an empty cabin. The plane had somehow repaired itself, but the crew and passengers were all missing. The radio cackled to life. Flight 307, we lost you there for a minute. Flight 307, report your current status. Flight 307, do you copy? I spoke into the radio and tried my best to not sound like a lunatic while describing what had happened. The flight control helped me safely land the plane at a nearby airport. I cried when I finally made it to the ground. I was told that the plane disappeared off the radar for a split second before reappearing. On the other hand, for me, it felt like I had spent months inside that plane cabin. The black void still comes to haunt me at night. It has become the very essence of my dreams. I wake up sweating after being chased by the same bird-like creatures. Sometimes when I look into the mirror, I can see the black void surrounding me and leaking into my very being. Many flights disappear every year, and I finally found out why. By the time you listen this, I would have met with the void, but I'd like to leave one last warning. Before you board a flight, remember the void. I heard the voice of my son echo in my head as I slowly woke up from deep sleep. He seemed to be crying. I sat upright and looked over at him. His face was etched with fear and panic as he continued shaking me like he was before to wake me up. I brought him close and gave him a hug to calm him down. This was the third night in a row that he had come into our room crying and deeply disturbed. I took him back to his room and tucked him in while he tried to explain to me that his nightmare was real. As I put him into bed, he repeatedly told me to check the living room, but I was too tired to fall into his antics. I made a mental note to bring it up with him tomorrow when he was in the right mental space. At the breakfast table before going to school, Adam described his night terror to my wife and me. It turns out his nightmare was actually quite terrifying, and I was now worried for his mental well-being. This is how he described his nightmare. He wakes up in the middle of the night needing to go get water. He walks over to the kitchen slowly to grab a drink when he hears faint sounds of conversation coming from the living room. He described the voices as squeaky. He goes to see what's happening and notices 4 clowns sitting on the couch and conversing with each other. He told us that they were laughing in a creepy way, and then suddenly they all snap their necks and start staring at him with wide smiles on their faces. He gets frightened and runs up to our bedroom and wakes us up. He kept insisting that it wasn't a dream and we should have checked the living room. My wife went to drop him off to school soon after that, and I drove to work forgetting all about his nightmare. After he came from school, my son still seemed disturbed by the nightmare. It seems like his fear was fueled further by his friends, and he was suddenly talking about killer clowns. He then pointed at a red mark on the couch and said that the clowns had done that. I examined the red mark further, and it looked like a mark made by a red marker, so I told him off for drawing on furniture to try and convince us, and sent him off to his room. Just before bedtime, I went to Adam's room and put a glass of water on his bedside table as a way to try and convince him that it was only a nightmare. I told him that if he wakes up in the night, he should just go back to sleep in the dream. I read him his usual bedtime story before tucking him into bed and kissing him goodnight. I took out his old, barely working night light and turned it on before leaving his room to help improve his sleeping environment. I called it a day and fell asleep soon after. I woke up with a dry, scaly throat sometime in the middle of the night. My tongue felt like sandpaper against my dry lips as I got up to get some water from the kitchen. As I walked down the dark hallway, I started to hear some faint noises from the living room. I started walking to the living room to see what all the fuss was about. As soon as I stepped in, my heart skipped a beat. Goosebumps appeared all over my arms and chills ran up my spine. I let out a choked gasp as I took in the scene in front of me. For clowns were sitting on the couches discussing something. Their laughs made my ears bleed. They wore bright clothing and had bright orange messes of hair. They were positioned in such a way on the couches that they were all facing away from me. I started to slowly walk away in fear when I suddenly stepped on a red squishy ball that I swore wasn't there before. It made a comically exaggerated sound, and all the clowns immediately snapped their necks back in my direction. I used my words carefully. Their bodies did not move a single bit, but their heads swiveled at impossible angles to face me. I nearly wet my pants as I stumbled on the ball and fell flat on the floor. Their faces were covered with white makeup, and they wore red balls as noses similar to the ball I tripped on. Their lips and surrounding area was painted with a crimson-red paint that on second thought reminded me of blood smeared on walls. They smiled wide smiles. Their skin stretched unnaturally far, and their mouth didn't open. Then slowly, one by one, they each revealed their sets of bright, white pointy teeth. Adrenaline surged through my body as I got up and ran back to my bedroom. I slammed the door shut and locked it. My wife now woke up clearly alarmed at why I was locking the door at this hour of the night. What happened next made the blood in my veins turn to ice. "Mom, Dad, help me." The noises that followed made me nearly puke. They were the sounds of my son's anguished screams mixed with the clown's laughter. They formed a torturing symphony that rang in my ears for days after. After 5 minutes of struggling outside the door, blood pooled from under the door, and it all went silent. Did you know that there were 86 commercial plane accidents last year? That's what I read in the airport lobby before I boarded my plane. Needless to say, it made me even more nervous. It was my first time flying, and reading about airplane crashes wasn't helping. I stopped for a slight moment before stepping into the plane with a shaky leg. The flight attendant flashed me a blinding white smile and asked for my plane ticket. I gave it to her with sweaty hands. She took a look at it and pointed me inside the cabin. My nerves were filling my legs with jittery energy, and the cramped cabin did not help that. I found my seat, and thankfully it was a window seat. I wiped the sweat off my forehead and looked around to make sure no one saw me. I didn't want anyone to laugh at me. I hurriedly sat down on my seat and took deep breaths. My chest rose and fell, but my heart continued beating relentlessly in my chest, and the sweat wouldn't stop forming on my forehead. The hum of the plane engines filled the atmosphere a couple of minutes later, and a lump formed in my throat as the plane accelerated. I could feel the pressure on my chest as the plane moved faster and faster. Just before the plane started to ascend, the front part of the plane went up and then fell again, causing a loud thud. I yelped as I heard the thud. A child behind me started to laugh before his mother shushed him. My face flushed red with embarrassment, and I shut my eyes tightly. I sensed the plane going higher and higher as the pressure on my chest started to increase. My chest tightened, and I was afraid the pressure was going to crush me. Nothing like that happened, though, and the plane stopped ascending after a couple of minutes and just started to fly forward. I unbuckled my seatbelt with shaky hands as my adrenaline rush wore off. The same flight attendant from earlier offered me a bottle and asked me if I was okay. I mumbled a no and quickly took the bottle. I stared at the white clouds from the window as the plane continued to soar in the air. Soon that got boring, and I was now more bored than nervous. Flying isn't so bad after all, I told myself as I started to look for a movie to watch on the screen in front of me. Instead, I opted out for some games and just played those instead on the remote. They weren't exactly exciting games, but they kept me entertained for the next 30 minutes. Soon enough, the lights in the cabin were turned off. Only dim blue lighting filled the cabin. Most people tried to go to sleep in the cramped seats. I decided to do the same as I wanted to just pass time. That was the worst decision I made. When I was just on the edge of sleep, I started to hear faint whispers in the cabin. My half-asleep mind didn't register them, and I fell asleep. That's the last thing I remember before I woke up. I woke up naturally a couple of hours later. I rubbed my tired eyes before looking around the cabin. It was completely empty. I blinked and rubbed my eyes again and looked around for anyone. The cabin was still dimly lit with the blue lights, and it was completely empty. Like everyone had just vanished. A pit formed in my stomach, and my mouth suddenly went dry. I got out of my seat and started walking down the aisle, moving my head side to side furiously to find someone. My fears were confirmed, and there was no one in the cabin. I moved to the next area via the curtains, and once again the plane was empty. I checked the toilets as well, and there was no one there. Maybe I slept through the landing, I thought, as my mind tried to rationalize the situation. It's ironic how in the most stressful situations, our first priority is to rationalize the situation, to find an explanation. I went to a window and pulled up the plastic window cover. My heart skipped a beat as I saw the dark sky and the faint outlines of whiskey clouds. Chills ran up my spine as my observation started to register. I was all alone on a plane 10,000 meters up in the air. I started running quickly to the pilot's cabin. I ran past multiple cabins separated by the curtains and the toilets. I ran and ran, but all I saw on the other side of the separating curtains was another cabin. I was sweating profusely. My heart was a scared rabbit trapped in my chest. No matter how far I ran, no matter how many cabins I crossed, I never reached the pilot's cabin. Every window showed the same dark sky and clouds. Every cabin was lit by the same dim blue lights. Every cabin had the same dark blue carpet. I collapsed in the middle of the aisle as I crossed my 30th seating cabin. I couldn't catch my breath. My clothes were wet with sweat, and the lump in my throat wouldn't go away. I needed to get out of this plane. Suddenly I heard a low hum, different from the hum of the plane engine. I strained my ears. It held a melody, a rhythm. It sounded serene and sad. I looked around and saw a woman sitting on a seat a couple of rows ahead of me. I could only see the back of her head. I got up and walked towards her, desperate for help. I stopped in my tracks when I saw what she was watching on her screen. It showed me behind her, like there was a camera behind me, and it was streaming to her screen. She stopped humming and turned her head around slowly. Her face turned the blood in my veins into ice. She was the same flight attendant. Her eyes were bloodshot and her eyelids were missing. Her mouth was curled into a smile that spread from ear to ear. "Is there a problem, sir?" She spoke in her calm voice. I stumbled backwards and nearly fell over before running without looking back. I kept on running and running until I tripped over and crashed onto the soft dark carpet. I looked back and noticed that I had tripped on a bottle, the same one that the flight attendant had given to me before I fell asleep. What does she want from me? I thought as I slowly got up and looked behind me for the first time. Thankfully, she had not followed me, and I was all alone in the cabin. I looked around and pondered on what I should do. I had no way out. The curtain to the next cabin ahead of me fluttered, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The flight attendant came out from behind the curtain. "Is there a problem, sir?" I stuttered as I slowly backed away. I hid into a solid object. I turned around and came face to face with the same flight attendant again. "Is there a problem, sir?" I looked back and suddenly all the seats were full. They were all twins of the same flight attendant. "Is there a problem, sir?" Their voices echoed through the whole cabin. Their voices shook me to the very core. I ran to the next cabin quickly and noticed that that cabin too was filled with the flight attendants. I continued running until I found myself facing an exit door. The flight attendants were following me. I could hear the drumming of their footsteps. I quickly opened the heavy door by turning the wheel. I would rather jump off the plane than face them. The door opened, and I was suddenly sucked into the blackness of the sky. It was cold. The chill creeped into my bones and into my very soul. I continued falling in the dark sky through the clouds. I waited for my horrible death. I waited for the moment I would hit the ground at my terminal velocity and break all the bones in my body. I waited for those short few moments of immense pain. I started to remember what had happened before this predicament, how I had gotten myself into that mess. The memory of me boarding the plane played in my mind. I saw myself about to fall asleep, and then suddenly, I find it hard to describe, but it's like I just jumped into that memory. Like being sucked into it. I was back in my plane seat. My body was still cold, and I could still feel the wind rustling in my hair as I fell. Slowly the feelings of me free falling subsided, and I could feel the cabin once again. I was transported back to the time just before I had fallen asleep. Needless to say, I did not fall asleep. A couple of agonizingly fearful hours later, the plane had finally landed, and I was ecstatic to feel the ground again. I had thought up until then that it was just a dream. It was just a nightmare induced by my fear of flying. However, what happened just as I departed from the plane made me doubt that. The same flight attendant was standing at the door wishing us farewell as they departed. When I passed in front of her, she said something that made chills run up my spine to this day. "Is there a problem, sir?" I quickly ran out of the flight and pushed past everyone. I safely got home. I wouldn't be typing this story just because of a scary flight, though. I am posting this story because I need help. I saw the flight attendant again today. She is right outside my window. I can't escape my room. No matter how many types I pass through the door, it always leads back again to my bedroom. She has been staring at me as I type this post. I don't think my window can hold her back. I handle extraterrestrial objects at NASA. Up until now, I've been analyzing various rocks and materials from space, with my next big project being analyzing soil samples from Mars. Over the years, the excitement of handling items from space had worn off, and my job was simply reduced to a simple routine I had set up for examining and recording the features of everything that was brought to my desk. Recently, I was given a smooth piece of metal that had apparently been found floating in orbit by the folks over at the International Space Station. When I first examined this hunk of metal, I was intrigued by its seemingly man-made shape, like it was deliberately created by someone and launched into space. It was no bigger than a small, sleek laptop charging brick and had smooth, rounded corners like pebbles in a river. It was an interesting find, and I was a little excited to examine this object. I was surprised that no one had considered this was probably launched into space by someone, because there's a very low chance that this device was naturally created. I was turning it over in my gloved hands when I first realized that it had a small slit on the left side. My heart rate began to quicken. Slipping a piece of paper into the slit caused the entire drive to start morphing. The metal began to melt away like chocolate and molded into a different shape entirely. Now there was a simple circular hole on the side that upon inspection seemed to be endless, as I only saw a dark pit no matter how hard I looked inside. I backed away from the device as I realized that I was working with technology so advanced. It was way beyond our understanding of physics and chemistry itself. This needed to be taken up to the higher-ups immediately. Somehow through the whole process of getting this out of space and onto my desk, no one had realized that this metal exterior hid technological components inside. It also explained why this hadn't yet been taken away by shadowy government organizations. The device had stopped moving and lay still on my table as I stared at it. On one hand, I knew this was well beyond what I could deal with. On the other, a strange, deadly curiosity urged me to investigate it just a little further. Perhaps I could find out what it did. It took me hours to get beyond that development. Every time I pushed something through that hole in the side of the device, it would promptly begin to reshape again until the hole closed in around the inserted object and matched exactly to its shape. It would then for a few moments, seeming like it was examining the object, and then spit it out completely with the metal reshaping into the same original slit. I was getting more and more worried as time ticked. My face felt hot and my hands clammy. I was about to call my boss to hand this over to the higher-ups before I got in trouble when I got a crazy idea. After pushing through everything from pens to metal rods into that hole, I decided to put in a simple USB-A connected cable into the hole. It was a random idea, possibly inspired by the fact that the last thing I had in my drawer was that cable, and it was the only thing I hadn't put into the device. As soon as I put in the connector into the side of the device, it began to conform to its shape and were once more. A loud bleep filled my entire office. The machine didn't reject the cable and instead kept it inside. My heart began to beat in anticipation as I plugged the cable into my personal laptop. I jumped when the laptop identified the device as a hard drive. It was simply named GSA Drive. I opened the drive, and inside I found one file and a folder. The file was a simple PNG image which depicted the logo of GSA, and under it revealed what the acronym stood for. Global Space Agency. I didn't have time to ponder over the existence of this organization, and instead backed out of the image to click into the other folder, fueled by curiosity. It took me a moment to register the size of that folder. The entire folder was 6,000 petabytes. Chills ran down my spine. I quickly called my boss and explained what I had on me. He didn't seem to buy it, but promised he'd come as soon as possible and take the device off me. Somehow the fact that I was about to lose this device made me want to dig in just a little further before I gave it back. I knew I was digging my grave, but an urge to know what was inside had overtaken me. I clicked back and quickly checked the hard drive's capacity, 10,000 petabytes. My stomach twisted into knots as I realized that this small hard drive had a capacity more than the modern internet. Only curiosity lured me in and enticed me. My want to explore this drive overtook the growing fear and anxiety that was building up in the back of my mind. I should have handed the drive to the higher-ups and let them deal with it. Much of the folders inside the main folder contained thousands and thousands of files that were all unrecognizable file types. My computer was unable to open or process any of them, and as far as I knew, these file formats did not exist. I found more images of various devices, vehicles, and weapons that seemed impossible to build and defied the laws of matter. However, I didn't have to look far to find a folder titled README. Inside, I found a document that details a disturbing and horrific notion. It explains the existence of the drive and why it's here. I'll transcribe it here for you to read yourself. File name, message from 2299. I don't know who you are or which timeline you exist in. I don't know what date it is for you, and I don't even know if you are human. As you can see, this is a desperate attempt at making contact. The past needs to know of our mistakes so they can be avoided. Throughout time, humankind has learnt from history, but never from the future. This is, I guess, a learning opportunity to not go down the same path we went. During the year 2050, there was a second, you could call it an industrial revolution. I'm assuming you know of the Industrial Revolution, since you have the technology to open this file and read it. This industrial revolution was a revolution of technology. A massive technological boom, built up by the decades of innovation before it. It was a time in which different discoveries from the previous decades came together in technology, and allowed us to redefine our devices forever. Soon enough, self-driving cars were replaced by a network of teleportation hubs that broke you down to the very atoms and rebuilt you on the other side. Not to say there weren't accidents, but medicine had advanced to such a degree that death had become a concept of the past. Several thousands of people began to live as mines on humanoid robots in the first few years of this technology's development. Quantum computers were replaced by cybernetic chips. Our own buildings evolved into smart skyscrapers that extended to the brink of the atmosphere. We didn't even spare the oceans, as they soon filled up with skyscrapers and underwater cities. When humanity finished conquering the Earth and rid it of all its other life, they realized the mistakes they had made. Several countries began to destroy cities and build them underground instead to encourage a natural environment on the top. It wasn't climate change that killed life. No, that was resolved ages ago. It was the rapid loss of habitat as the population extended beyond the Earth's holding capacity. The only animals and plants that were left were farming necessities that humanity needed. Unfortunately, they could not form a complete ecosystem, and so the environment continued to suffer and break with no solution in sight. So humanity took to the stars. In a short span of 100 years, all the planets in the solar system had been terraformed. From the hot desert of Mercury to the icy oceans of Jupiter's moons, people had found a way to live there. The population continued to expand throughout those years, and somehow began to exceed the capacity of the entire universe. What many people didn't realize as they terraformed planet after planet is that they could not create life. They could not build the environment that they had destroyed back on Earth. I was one of the few self-proclaimed space explorers like the sea explorers back in the days Earth was Earth. Our job was to find more livable planets that could be terraformed quickly and efficiently. We did have the technology to terraform every planet, but planets like Mercury took a lot more time and energy to transform, because after all, we couldn't literally move the planet from its orbit. Given another century, though, I doubt we wouldn't be able to do it. Experimental wormhole technology had gone into development a couple of decades earlier. Space vessels with this form of transport built and were given to anyone who wished to explore space alone, millions of light years away from the closest human. These ships could construct wormholes to another given location in space and pass through them, skipping millions of light years of travel in the process. Just like that, humanity once again began expanding through the observable universe like cracks slowly forming in glass. We encountered no other life form throughout our exploration, and believed we were truly alone until I visited Croton 42A. The planet had deep blue seas and continents full of strange animals. They seemed to be early in their evolution, not yet intelligent. When my ship first landed on the planet, I quickly realized that the atmosphere matched that of the original Earth, rich in oxygen. The planet was an exact duplicate of Earth. In the vastness of the universe, statistics had created a similar planet. I was far, far away from the closest space station. There was no way for me to communicate my find. I didn't explore the planet any further, careful not to disturb the environment and avoid any other possible intelligent life forms that I had not yet seen. Instead, I collected samples from the area that my ship had landed and promptly left, making sure I sterilized my entire space suit in the sterilization room. I took the samples back to the closest human settlement, and after that news spread like wildfire, I became somewhat of a celebrity, a legendary space explorer who had found a utopia for the wealthiest of people, and had most importantly found more life in the bleakness of space. It wasn't just me that went right back to the closest human settlement, though. Something had survived the sterilization chamber and came right back with me. It had spread across my entire spaceship and to every person I had contacted. It jumped from person to person and spread quickly. Through all these decades of innovation and advancement in technology, we had forgotten one thing. When humanity began to take over the planet, they also eradicated all bacteria and viruses, effectively making sure no one ever got sick. Medicine advanced too quickly for its own good, and with this growth, it left a gaping hole in itself. All medicinal plants that were needed for making medicines had gone extinct as they were deemed useless after all diseases were eradicated. A simple virus from a planet millions of light years away began to conquer us, just like we had done to the stars. Just like we had built large networks of heat and light energy converters around stars, this disease began to surround us. In the first year, half of the entire human population died. The symptoms were simple. The patient's skin would begin to slowly turn blue as the days passed. When the skin had turned completely blue, and it would shrivel before the entire body would be unable to hold water. The patient would die a sudden death from dehydration. Whole settlements collapsed into anarchy as people fought for food and resources. Military groups formed and attacked in mobs, stealing resources and food. Wars erupted across the intergalactic utopia humanity had created for themselves and brought buildings to the ground. Nothing could stop it from spreading. We didn't even know how it spread, with it seeming to spread through all ways possible. Scientists studying patients began to die, and there was just no way to study the virus without becoming infected yourself. The wealthiest of people began to buy out expensive spaceships to quarantine in, but they were soon attacked as all order collapsed. For a short few months, the chaos and war lit up whole planets like fireworks in the sky. With our advanced weaponry, humans became desperate animalistic versions of themselves, scrounging for supplies and food, all while carrying the virus and transmitting it everywhere. Throughout all this, I remained alive. I didn't show a single symptom, and somehow the virus had just passed through me. I took my ship and moved away from major human settlements to protect myself, while still listening into broadcasts and messages from everyone. I watched digitally as entire human settlements went empty and infrastructure began to decay. All our development over centuries began to decay and fall back. The population shrunk until it was confined to just one planet, Earth, the only planet that had not recorded a case of this virus. A small government had protected the planet amongst all the intergalactic chaos. The people on Earth thought that was the end of it, that they had somehow survived against all odds, and that it was up to them to rebuild the intergalactic empire that we had formed. A mystery case stomped on those ambitions and eradicated the rest of the population. After days of not getting a single broadcast or message, I realized that I was possibly the last of my kind in the empty, hopeless vacuum of space. I visited the abandoned colonies, desperate to find a single human being other than myself, but all I found were bodies that the virus had left behind in its wake. I have somehow not become infected yet. The virus had spared me, and at the same time sentenced me to death in the loneliness of the stars. As this century ends and a new one starts, an entire era begins. An era without humanity. An era in which all our settlements will begin to collapse into dust until there is no mark of us left in the universe. Sometimes I wonder, what if that's what had happened to all the other life? I returned to the planet that the virus had originated from and decided to spend the rest of my life there. Even after taking my space suit off and breathing in the sweet fresh air, the virus won't infect me. I'm somehow the only one immune out of the trillions of people that succumb to this disease. Before I end my miserable existence, I've tasked my ship's AI to write and deliver this message on my ship's main hard drive. It will open a small wormhole and try to send this in the past, a technology that I have personally been working on myself ever since the whole human race went extinct. My ship's AI helped me greatly, and I was able to hopefully achieve what all of humanity hadn't yet achieved: time travel. If you are reading this message, and the date is somewhere around the early 21st century, it means that my time-traveling wormhole succeeded, and that I have long since died. Well, in your timeline, I don't even exist yet. Please spread this message around as much as you can. Give it to everyone. Learn from our mistakes. Protect the planet. Take care of it. It is the only home we have in the deadly inky black sea of stars. My eyes were brimmed with tears as I finished reading the message. Deep down I knew it was genuine. I told my boss I was joking with him, and took the drive for myself. I'm sharing this message here before it's taken away from me and is censored. I was taking the train back home when I first saw him. I walked down to the train platform and was about to board my train. Naturally, I looked down at the gap between the train or platform to avoid falling into it. What I saw next would haunt me forever for my life. Sitting there in the gap was a deformed figure. It was pitch black except for its two eyes. Its eyes were very bloodshot, like it hadn't slept for years. The pupils were cloudy. Those were the only features on its face. It reached out with its thin hand and wrapped it around my ankle. Its grip was freezing cold. Electric shots were sent up my leg, and I was frozen in fear. Time slowed down, and the moment lasted for ages. I immediately snapped out of it when someone shoved me from behind, and I nearly tripped. The creature immediately released its grip and slipped under the train. I stabilized myself and held the hand grips on the roof of the train. My legs were literally jelly, and I sat down on the seat closest to me. For a while, I sat there still looking at the very place I saw the creature. Then the train doors started closing, and the train started moving. I couldn't comprehend what I had just seen. A creature just sitting there in the gap and nearly dragging me in. My heart rate was still through the roof, and my breaths were still panicked. I chalked it up to my imagination after finding no explanation for whatever the hell that was. The train stopped at the next station, and my eyes were immediately drawn to the platform gap. I looked away and got my phone out to distract myself. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure rising out of the gap, crawling out, towards me, with its thirsty bloodshot eyes. I quickly looked in that direction and held my hand up. There was nothing there. The train doors closed, and the guy that just walked onto the train gave me a weird look. I ignored it. I was definitely imagining things. I had had a rough day at work today. When it was finally my stop, I got off the train and looked straight ahead, not daring to look at the gap. I arrived home after a 10-minute walk from the station. Once inside, I freshened up a bit and sat down on the couch to catch up on some Netflix. Suddenly, I had a horrible gut feeling. My primal instincts were kicking and telling me to immediately run out of the house. I turned my head, and my eyes fell on my bedroom door. It was slightly ajar. Through the gap, I could see the same creature, its large bloodshot eyes staring at me. Its hands reached out towards me like shadows. It continued staring with its bulging, demented eyes. I immediately jumped out of the couch and ran away from the hand. It stretched impossibly long and grabbed me by the throat. I was frozen in fear as it dragged me across the floor towards the door. I tried to push it away, but it had an iron grip. The thin hand was overwhelmingly strong. It dragged me closer and closer to the door, but didn't pull me through it. Instead, it stopped me a bit away from the door. Another opening in its face that I didn't even know existed opened up. A large snake-like tongue with teeth painfully growing out of it came out of its face. Its eyes were indifferent and continued staring at me. Weird, thick black saliva dripped from its tongue as it slowly came towards me. Out of pure luck, I kicked the door and it was pushed open. The creature immediately left me and kind of melted away as the door opened. I ran inside the bedroom and closed the door shut. I locked it. Chill ran up my spine as I started imagining the creature devouring me with its hideous tongue. And then it occurred to me through my panic, like a bright light in darkness. The creature can only live in gaps. So I sealed every single gap I could find in my home. All the doors, all the cupboards. I put clothes under the door gaps. The creature could not get me now. I lay down in bed to calm down a bit. I could still see its thick black saliva at the doorway. I didn't dare touch it. I laid down in bed and pulled the blanket over myself. I grabbed the book I had been reading and started reading. I felt accomplished. The creature could not get me. Then I felt an icy weight on my legs. I looked at my legs, and there was no bulge under the blanket. Nothing could be there. I held up the blanket and looked under. It was too late when I realized that I had just created another gap. The creature sat on my legs, its bloodshot eyes still staring at me. Its black tongue was hanging out like a dog, and then it lunged forward. I was desperate for a job. I was in my final years of college, and I had lots of student loans built up. As soon as I saw the night guard job advert in the local newspaper, I knew I was fit for the job. I usually stay up late each night anyways, so it won't make a difference to my schedule. I realized I could also just chill on my phone the whole shift and get paid for it. We had a small local subway station for our town. It only had one platform, and few trains ever went there. The subway station itself was very old, only used by the local town people. Recently, the old night guard for the subway station had retired, and they needed someone to take over the position. As soon as I called, they immediately hired me. Looks like this wasn't a popular job. Let me give you a little description of the subway station. I've only ever been to the station a few times. So basically, you walk down the stairs to get to the subway. Yes, it's underground. Then you will see the long tracks extending forever on either side of you, and also a short platform for boarding the train. On the platform to your right would be a ticket, and also a security guard booth. Nowadays you can just tap your Metro card, so the booth was used as a security guard booth. Since it was an old subway station, the lighting also wasn't very good. It was very poorly lit, and had a very creepy vibe to it. There were shadows everywhere, and the light was so dim it took your eyes a while to adjust and be able to see your surroundings. So anyways, here I was now making my way to my little security booth. The day guard shook hands with me, and as he left wished me good luck. Who the hell wishes you good luck as they leave you to your shift? I ignored it and got myself settled. I read through the boring instruction manual that outlined basic evacuation procedures and what to do in unlikely scenarios like a bomb threat. My shift was from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. I was about to just go on my phone and scroll through Reddit when my eye caught on a single piece of paper. It was titled "Must Read Important Rules." The title was overwhelming and written in big red blocky letters. I picked up the sheet and read it. This is what it said. If you see a man in a black tuxedo and bright red leather bag walk in asking for a ticket, say, "I don't work here," and immediately turn around. He will not be there when you turn back around. If you see a black figure in camera number 4, quickly look away and never look at the camera again. If you start hearing whistling, get the out immediately. Around 12 a.m., you may see a woman with an umbrella come into the subway station. She will be walking facing away from you. Do not under any circumstances try to look at the woman's face. If you see yourself staring at you from any of the cameras, immediately cover up that camera. You may hear yourself speaking telling you to come out. Stay put in your booth and do not come out. If the door to your booth starts shaking and starts to open, push the door closed as hard as you can. Do not let the door open. An extension to Rule 4. If you see yourself staring at you from the booth window, immediately look away and hold that door shut as hard as you can. If you notice that the clock on the wall has stopped working, immediately hide under the desk and do not come out until you start hearing the ticking of the clock again. At 3:03 a.m., a weird-looking train will come. You will hear it from its distinct horn that doesn't sound like any other train. Carefully look out and see if anyone steps out of the train. If you see even a single person depart that train, immediately grab the handgun in your drawer and shoot them, no matter who the person is. If the train departs and you still haven't shot the person, it is too late. Your clock, phone, or any device that shows the time will try to deceive you. They will show the time incorrectly and instead show your shift end time. They're trying to get you to come out. If you feel like the time isn't right, stay put in your booth and wait until morning and you see people walking into the subway station. Apart from the weird train that will come, you should only see one other normal train arrive at the station at exactly 11 p.m. That will be the last train until 5 a.m. If you see any other train arrive at the station, know you are not tripping. Hide in your booth and wait it out until morning. If you break any of the above underlined rules, we are no longer responsible for your safety. We will nonetheless come to collect you in the morning if anything goes wrong. The safest place at the station if you break the rules is on the tracks. The subway management team. The rules sounded totally fake. Suddenly a man in a black tuxedo came inside the station. He knocked on the glass. My heartbeat flew like a plane as I saw the man in the black tuxedo ask me for a ticket. My body was suddenly frozen on the spot. I was unable to speak. My voice got trapped in my throat. I barely managed to choke out, "No, I don't work here." The man suddenly seemed confused. His face slowly got even more distorted. His left eye got larger and larger, his nose bent at awkward angles, and his mouth twisted impossibly long. I grimaced at the sight and nearly threw up my dinner on the floor. The man turned away and literally crawled out of the station before his body got so messed up he'd be unable to move. Well, I just experienced the first rule. I'll update throughout the night. I'm definitely not coming back after this shift. I was very traumatized after seeing a man turn into some messed up organism right in front of my eyes. I just sat in my booth rereading the rules again and again. It was so dark in here that I had to use the small lamp on the table next to me. They really need to fix the lights here. Yeah, I also realized I had already broken the first rule. Hopefully, other than traumatizing me, it didn't do much damage. This is going to be a great shift. The first thing I tried was to walk out, but I could see movements in my peripheral vision. They got closer as I moved towards the exit. The shadows in the station elongated towards me, and I got a horrible gut feeling. I'm telling you, I won't even make it a few steps outside the station if I exit before the end of my shift. I ran back to my booth and just sat there. It felt like the shadows themselves were watching me. Suddenly I saw movement in one of the cameras. There was a dark figure. No, I can't even call it a figure. It was a literal monster. It was worse than your worst nightmare. It had 4 arms, or were they tentacles? They each ended in a razor-sharp point. Were those eyes all over its body? It had red beads like things over its whole body. They reminded me of small bright red jewels on a pitch-black fabric. It had things coming out of its mouth. That's all I can call them, things. They weren't like tentacles, they were twisted and curled like worms, as if it was vomiting its whole brain out. It had legs like the fins of a fish, thin and floppy. How was it even standing straight? Suddenly it dawned on me. I quickly tore my eyes off the camera feed. I covered the camera feed with my jacket. The whole image of the creature had been fully etched into my brain, and I was shaking uncontrollably. I swear I hadn't looked for too long. Chills ran up my spine as I heard a high-pitched whistle. It sounded excited and hungry. More shrill whistles echoed around the dark subway station. My whole body was frozen on the spot, and I swear the creature could hear my panicked heartbeat. The whistles got louder and louder, as if they were coming closer. A black sticky liquid oozed out from underneath the door of my booth. I backed up, and the second time this night, nearly lost my dinner on the floor. My stomach must be very strong. The liquid bubbled and seeped in very slowly. It didn't have a color. It was the color of nothingness. I was mesmerized by its color. It was the color you see in between your dreams at night. It was the color a blind man would see. I suddenly saw the same creature I saw in the camera feed, now literally touching the glass of my booth. I let out a sharp yelp as the creature suddenly moved towards the door, and the doorknob started rattling. Then I heard another sound, a sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Just when I thought I couldn't experience any more fear than what I was currently experiencing. All my muscles locked up. I was literally frozen in fear. The sound was indescribable. It was a mixture of moans and laughter, crying and shouting. It was a sound nothing can recreate. The sound blared like a horn, and my brain suddenly processed what was happening. The phantom train was coming. The creature that was at the door of my booth looked scared too. It spasmed all over like a fish out of water. Suddenly it turned around and ran or slithered. I don't even know what word to use for its movement. Looks like I just survived breaking another rule. The phantom train came in. Have you guys watched Thomas the Tank Engine? Yeah, that's exactly how the train looked like. It had a human face embedded into its front. Other than that, the train was fairly normal, and it came to a stop on the platform. I couldn't erase the image of the face of the train looking at me as it stopped by. It had an unnatural grin on its face. Its eyes way too big and cartoony. It took a lot of effort to snap out of it and pick the handgun out of the drawer under my desk. It was already loaded. I did not want to break this rule. Even the creature that came after me was scared of this train. I honestly do not want to face whatever comes out of the train. Something deep in my gut told me that if this time I failed to follow the rule, I won't make it out of this subway. Guess who came out? It was my little sister. She's recently turned 15. She walked out looking dazed, like she had just woken up. She looked around and saw the train station. Her eyes lit up, and soon as she saw me, I pointed the gun at her, and her face crossed over with fear and concern. She told me to put the gun down. She asked me why I was doing this. Suddenly the train blared its hideous horn, and its doors started to shut. My sister looked back, equally disgusted at the sound. I pushed the trigger. It all happened in slow motion. The handgun made a loud sound that echoed all across the subway station. The bullet pierced the back of my sister's head and made blood splatter everywhere. My sister dropped like a stone, and blood gushed out of her wound like a waterfall. It pooled all around her lifeless body. The train left, its horn mocking me. I quickly ran back to my booth and broke down. I cried for what seemed like hours and screamed at the subway station. She seemed so real. Was it actually her body laying there? Did I just take the life of my sister? No, I couldn't have. No. I am trying to calm down by typing this up. It's still only 3:20 a.m., and I have around 2 hours to go before my shift ends. I don't think I'll make it. This isn't a subway station, it's a portal to hell. As soon as I finished typing up the post, it dawned on me that the clock had stopped ticking. I scrambled over to my desk and got under it. Just as I slipped my head under the desk, I caught a view of the platform. My sister's body got up like nothing had happened and stared blankly ahead. Shadows from the station twisted and curled into weird sorts of silhouettes. I wasn't going to break another rule, so I tore my eyes off the sight and hid under the desk. I checked the time on my watch. 4:30 a.m. I only had 30 minutes left before my shift ended. I nearly jumped in pure ecstasy. Finally, this nightmare is over. Finally, I could go home and check on my sister. The clock started its rhythmic ticking again, and I pulled myself out from under the desk. I checked my watch again. 5 a.m. Wait, hold up. How did 30 minutes pass away so fast? Just then I remembered the rule. All my time-keeping devices may show the time differently to trick me. That meant I had to wait in my booth and not come out till it's morning, and I see people coming into the station. I scanned the camera feed for anything new, making sure to not look at camera 4, which was conveniently set away from all the other cameras. Then the worst possible thing happened. I saw myself staring at me from camera 2. I had a painful grin on my face. My eyes were so wide open, I swear they could have popped out of my sockets at any moment. Before I broke another rule, I quickly tore away my eyes from the disturbing sight and came face to face with my twin staring at me from outside the booth. I jumped to the door and pushed for dear life. Luckily, the door opened inwards, so it was so much easier for me to hold the door. I only had to push. My twin battered itself onto the door repeatedly. Big bulky thuds shook my whole body. My twin's shoulders started to get bloody, but he continued unfazed. I could feel myself get pushed further and further back every time he rammed into the door. I was not going to be able to hold the door for any longer. I quickly picked up my handgun from the desk and turned the safety off. As soon as my twin moved back and got ready to ram in through the door, I aimed my gun at the door. My mind took over for me at that moment. Adrenaline pushed through my body, and my heart rate was high as ever. My demented twin pushed through the door and fell on the floor. I shot 3 rounds straight into his head and neck. I jumped past his body and sprinted to the tracks. Demented me got up again and ran towards me at lightning speed. I jumped off the platform onto the tracks, and the last thing I remembered was hearing my demented twin's ragged breaths right behind me and the crushing impact of my body on the metal tracks. I woke up with a dull pain throbbing through my forehead. I tried to get up and felt even more pain in my knees and my left wrist. How long have I been passed out for? I had lost all track of time. I crawled across the tracks to the far wall of the subway station and slumped against it. My foggy mind cleared, and all the memories of this hellish place came rushing back. I looked around the dark as ever at the subway station for any more threats. My demented twin has thankfully disappeared. I had the subway station all to myself again. I was bruised all over, and I had definitely broken something in both my knees. I had a big deep gash in my forehead. My left wrist was definitely broken, and it was severely swollen. I could not move it without feeling intense pain. The adrenaline rush had long worn off, and I felt defeated and extremely tired. If I was going to die here, I wanted to die in peace at least. I took out my phone out of my pocket. The screen was cracked into a million pieces, and it would not turn on. My watch was still working surprisingly, although its glass was also cracked. 4:05 a.m. I had no idea if this was the actual time or not. Either way, I was pretty much unable to get onto the high platform again and walk out of the subway station. I couldn't call for help, which I just realized. Why the hell did I not call the police as soon as I broke the first rule, so they could get me out of here? I had made several poor choices along the way, and now here I am, ready to die on the tracks. Suddenly a woman with a deep black umbrella walked into the station. She was facing away from me and looked confused. "Hey, can you call more people? I'm stuck in here, please, I need help." I desperately spoke out. "Shit!" I realized too late as the woman turned around. "There we go, I just broke another rule." She turned around and gasped as she saw me. She came closer. "I guess that's the final rule I'd ever break," I thought, letting the creature do whatever it wanted. Surprisingly, the woman asked me if I was okay, and told me to stay put and wait until she got the ambulance here. Then she picked up her phone and started calling. I was only able to mumble a thanks before I passed out again. I guess I got very lucky. I had pretty much broken every single rule on that list and still survived. I returned home, and thankfully my sister was still alive. I told my family I fell down the stairs of the subway station to explain my injuries, which they are definitely not buying. But then again, I don't want to tell them about the rules, or they'll think the head trauma has made me crazy. Today I received a text on my phone. Congratulations, you have been promoted to work as a night guard on our only night train. We have also sent a sum of $100,000 to your bank account as your pay for your first shift. We hope to see you at Redacted for your next shift in 2 weeks' time. I had been driving on the empty highway for a couple hours in my car. Just as I was about to fall asleep, the car let out a ding to let me know that fuel was running low. I was tired, very tired. It had definitely not been a good idea to decide to take the drive home at night instead of booking a room in a motel. I looked at the never-ending road and the thick forest lining along it. The headlights illuminated what was otherwise the darkest night I'd seen. Not a single star dotted the dark cloud-dominated sky. There was no one on the road, and the monotony of the same forest mile after mile was starting to take a toll on me. I watched as the forest blurred beside me after I steadily pressed my foot on the accelerator. There must be a gas station somewhere around here. I spotted one, right between the line of trees that populated either side of the road. It stuck out like a sore thumb amongst the dark trees. Dim lights did a poor job of illuminating the station and gave it a run-down, neglected feel. I ignored all the red flags as I pulled up to the station and parked my car in one of the bays to refuel it. The dim white lights overhead seemed to give me a slight migraine. They were intensely white, but very dim. I saw no other cars in the bay. The gas pump was old and slightly damaged, but it did the job and filled my tank. After filling my car, I started to walk towards the convenience store to pay. The heavy glass doors were unlocked, and the lights inside were on. I pushed open the door and walked inside. The place felt like it hadn't been updated since the 80s. A retro-tiled floor combined with products that I either hadn't heard of or were from old brands led me to this conclusion. The shopkeeper caught me staring at the aisles of old products that had been discontinued a long time ago and spoke. "Is there anything wrong, sir?" he asked, making me jump. I had somehow only noticed his presence now, and even he represented the 80s, having dressed in a striped button-up shirt and slacks. He sported an impressive mustache, thin spectacles, and had an air of mystery around him. "Ah, no, just came here to pay for the gas and buy a coffee," I said, still collecting myself. I walked over to the counter while feeling my pockets to search for my wallet. I must have left it back in the car. "I'll be right back, forgot my wallet," I told the shopkeeper. He flashed me a knowing smile. There was something wrong with his teeth, but I didn't register it as I quickly whipped around to go to my car. They were rotting. As I stepped out of the convenience store and began my walk towards the car, when I noticed I wasn't getting any closer to my car. It didn't make sense. There was a short distance between my car and the shop, yet no matter how much I walked, I covered no distance. It was like the ground had turned into a treadmill, and no matter how far I walked, I never got closer to my car. I looked behind me and realized I was still a step or two from the entrance to the convenience store. I saw the shopkeeper staring at me through the glass doors with an indescribable expression. His face was neutral, yet the way his eyes focused on me fueled a strong sense of apprehension within my soul. I ran, now more frantic than before. Paying for the fuel was no longer a priority. I wanted to get to my car and book it. It was all futile, no matter how fast I ran. I never made it to my car, and the nightmare didn't stop. How long do you think you would have kept running in my situation? I was defeated and knew I could not fight whatever force was acting upon this place. I had made a mistake of ever stopping by, and now I was paying for it. The very laws of physics were being bent in this place, and I still could not understand how walking forward never seemed to help me actually physically move forward. Panic surged through my veins as my desire to free myself from this loop grew into an animalistic urge for survival. Nothing worked. I could only have run for so long before I collapsed, unable to run any further. When faced with this defeat, I had no choice but to walk back inside the convenience store and face the shopkeeper who had continually stared at me throughout the struggle. As I turned around, I seemed to snap out of that cycle, and my steps actually allowed me to move forward. I burst through the glass doors and screamed at the shopkeeper. "What is happening?" He smiled, a wide smile that stretched from ear to ear. There was something wrong with his mustache. I squinted and noticed that it was pulsating and writhing with maggots. There were dozens of them, wriggling in his bushy mustache and climbing into his nostrils. My scream echoed several times in the small convenience store and was followed by the shopkeeper's hysterical laugh. I tried to run out the glass doors again and slammed my body against them to open them. They didn't budge. The blow knocked the wind out of my body, causing my lungs to feel like deflated balloons. A dull, excruciating pain spread across my entire torso. My vision swam, and I lay there on the floor, struggling to recover. I don't know how long I lay there as the waves of pain flowing through my torso began to fade away, but when I found the strength to get back off the floor and look around, the shopkeeper was gone. The place looked newer, like it had only been constructed a couple of months ago. The cobwebs that once stretched over the shelves were now gone, and the tiled floor was whiter. The fluorescent lights above also seemed to shine brighter. A deep primal instinct to escape resided in my gut, but the glass doors wouldn't open no matter how hard I pushed against them, like they were held in place by a physical barrier. I stared through the glass at my car, and suddenly wanted to be out there in the cool night air instead of being trapped inside this gas station. It felt as if the outside resided in a different dimension, and an interdimensional barrier between the glass and the outside kept me from going back outside. It was a viable theory, considering how old this place seemed when I walked in, only to have it suddenly renewed, as if time itself had ticked back. A low moan reverberated through the air, catching my attention immediately. My thoughts about my current dilemma completely flew out of my head, as the sound caused every single one of my senses to stand on end. I slowly looked behind me and noticed a corpse behind me. The body was burnt. The skin was charred and black in some places and red and raw in others. The face of the corpse was completely disfigured. Her left eye was missing and half of her hair had been burned away from her exposed bloody scalp. Part of her seemed to have melted onto the floor due to the extreme heat. I jumped back and had a strong urge to empty my stomach on the floor. Bile rose to the back of my throat, but I swallowed it back down. I slowly walked away from the corpse and turned around into an aisle to avoid it. I could not bear looking at the body without feeling the pain the person must have felt as they were burned alive. Much to my dismay, I nearly stepped on another burnt corpse in the next aisle. It was similar to the last one, and finally gave my stomach the push it needed to empty all its contents on the floor. A significant portion of my vomit landed on the burnt corpse itself and seeped into the burnt and separated tissues. I started to gag even more violently at the sight of this scene, but my stomach had nothing else to expel. Walking into another aisle led me to the third and final corpse in this place. Those poor people seemed to have all been burnt in this place. There was no evidence of a fire ever occurring in the convenience store as I walked around it, though, and I obviously would have always burnt to my demise had there been a fire a short while ago. These bodies seemed to have appeared with the disappearance of the shopkeeper. I heard movement behind me. This was followed by the sound of something being dragged against the floor. It almost had a squeak to it, as if a wet, heavy sponge was being pushed over the tiles. I stood completely frozen in fear. Suddenly something grabbed at my leg. More shuffling sounds followed from my left. Another thing grabbed my leg. It felt like a hand. Its grip was weak and faltering. My heart skipped a beat as a third hand joined them and gripped at my leg. I was frozen in fear, and my heart was violently bashing against my chest. It felt like I was having a heart attack. "Help us," 3 mangled voices moaned. Then they used their hands to slowly climb up my legs and stand up, using me as support. I still couldn't see what it was grabbing at me, as they were behind me, a mixture of dry burnt flesh and wet pus-filled wounds rubbed against my bare hand, as one of them reached up and grabbed my hand. I slowly turned my head to look down at what was grabbing me, and came face to face with the lifeless eyes of the burnt corpse. All 3 of them were focused on standing up by slowly crawling up my body. This somehow snapped me out of my paralysis. I shook them off me like a scorpion had gotten into my pants and lunged forward, nearly falling on the floor myself. It was then that I realized that a fire had started to spread throughout the place. The black smoke reduced my visibility and made it incredibly hard to see. The corpses continued to crawl towards me inch by inch as fire began to consume every inch of the store. Unbearable heat radiated onto my skin and deep into my body as I began to slowly burn in this hell. I ran aimlessly through the store as the fire licked at me and extended its tendrils to consume me. It felt as if layers of my skin were starting to melt off. I bumped against a solid surface and felt a burning metal handle on my stomach. In desperation, I burnt my hand to turn that handle and open the door. I found myself in a toilet. The fire had not spread through here, but smoke was leaking in through the sides of the door. I may not die in the fire, but I would soon succumb to suffocation. What was happening to me? I struggled to come up with an explanation in my mind for the predicament I found myself in. I had walked into a gas station to pay for my fuel, and now suddenly this place was on fire. Where did the shopkeeper go to, and why were there maggots in his face? Where had the corpses appeared from? The rising temperature of the enclosed room snapped me out of my thoughts and urged me to take action. I spotted a medium-sized window right above the toilet that I could break and use to get out of the store. I smashed the glass with my fist and punched it several more times to clear the window. Shards of glass were embedded into my knuckles, but my primal need for survival kept me going. The window was just barely big enough for me to crawl through. My head went through easily. It felt like crawling through a shark's teeth. The glass stabbed into me and formed long slices as I pushed myself out through the window. I hadn't removed all of the glass from the window, and the sharp bits remaining on the edges dug into me and drew linear cuts on my whole body. My entire torso was burning in pain, and as I continued to push myself through the window with all my strength, I started to wonder whether dying in the fire would have been less painful. I managed to get myself through though, except I hadn't accounted for one thing. Since I dove head first out of the window, there was no way for me to land on my feet. I could swear I heard my skull crack open as my head slammed against the asphalt. As I heard the dull thud of my body hitting the floor after, my vision started to tunnel. In one single moment, I felt pain across my entire raw, burnt, and cut body. In the next moment, that pain seemed to lift off me as my consciousness faded away like a candle being blown. Several days later, I found myself waking up in a hospital surrounded by the beeps of machinery. I was covered from head to toe in casts, and my entire body hurt. The doctors told me I was found outside an old abandoned gas station. They speculated my body had been dumped by a supposed kidnapper, who had tortured me to death and had tried to burn my body as well. They told me I had brain damage and severe memory loss when I tried to tell them the true story. I was a traumatized maniac to them. I managed to recover in hospital as months and years passed. After I successfully went through rehabilitation, only my physical and mental scars remained. Today I drove to that same gas station. The window that I had crawled out of that horrific night several years ago was still broken. I didn't stop there and instead continued driving. As I passed the gas station, I saw that same shopkeeper I had met that night staring at me through the glass double doors with a malicious smile spread across his face. The Jewelstone Shopping Mall is a large shopping mall with 9 levels. The first few floors hold all the shops of the shopping mall, while the other higher floors have been bought out by businesses. The 5th floor, for example, is a large medical clinic, consisting of a carpeted lobby and several rooms for doctors and patients. The 7th floor is a tutoring center complete with a lobby, seating lounge, and several rooms for students. You get the idea. The higher levels aren't like a usual mall with vast spaces and multiple shop fronts. The levels are accessible from a set of twin elevators that are constantly filled with people going up and down between floors. While the elevators are the main form of travel between floors, there is still a fire escape that crisscrosses through all the floors and leads to the ground level as an option during emergencies. The fire escapes are designed so that the doors to the fire escape open from the outside, but can be locked to not open from the inside. This helps keep people out of closed levels, as some levels close at different times to others. The 9th floor of the shopping mall has been closed for as far back as I can remember. It was never bought by a business, and the elevators have been programmed, so they do not go to that floor even when prompted to. There have been several rumors and ghost stories circulating about that floor ever since the mall was built, but as far as I know, no one has ever been on that floor. Imagine my surprise when the elevator doors opened up to a dark lobby and the smooth female voice of the elevator stated, "9th floor." Chills ran up my spine immediately as I stared into the dark carpeted lobby of this mysterious floor. Small beams of sunlight poured into the hallway from the windows at the side of the building, doing a poor job of illuminating the lobby. I frantically pressed the closed doors button on the elevator, but the doors did not move. The elevator was stuck. I stepped out into the lobby, having no choice but to take the fire escape down to get out of this creepy floor. My gut instinct shouted at me to quickly run and get out of the floor, but perhaps the paralysis of fear and morbid curiosity kept me on that floor for longer. I started to look around and noticed that to my left the lobby split off into two dark hallways as the ceiling lights were not turned on. To my right there was a vacant reception desk with the logo of a dentist center hanging just above the chair on the wall. The name on the logo made the hair on the back of my neck stand up and sent never-ending chills down my spine. Botched dentistry. Subconsciously, I started to back away from the empty receptionist desk as fresh fear flooded into my mind. It was at that moment that I knew I needed to desperately get out of this floor. On most floors in the shopping mall, the fire escape was located in one of the hallways. I stared at the dark hallways extending on either side at the left of the lobby and knew that they were my only way out. I walked to the far end of the lobby in order to go down one of the hallways. My senses were on full alert, and every little shadow made me jump. I stared down both the left and right hallways. They were both pitch black, and I could only see the faint outline of a door at the end of both hallways. It was apparent that one of those doors would be a fire escape, while the other would most likely lead to toilets or another room. I decided to go with the left hallway, and pulled my phone out of my pocket to use its flashlight. My flashlight illuminated the hallway in an eerie dim white light, and I started to walk into it, hoping that the fire escape would be at the end. My heart nearly popped out of my chest when I heard a faint electric were coming from one of the thick closed doors beside me in the hallway. As a quick impulse, I instantaneously turned off my flashlight, leaving me engulfed by the darkness. A bright light came from the little windows in one of the doors in the hallway. The electric seemed to emanate from that door as well. My breathing was shallow and panicked as I slowly tiptoed to the door and put my eyes up to that window to see what was inside. What I saw next made me nearly empty the contents of my stomach on the carpet. Inside, a pale man in a white lab coat, goggles, and a surgical mask was operating on a patient sitting on a usual dentist's chair. It seemed like a normal scene in a dentist room, except the dentist was holding an electric saw. He brought it down to the unconscious patient's mouth. Blood and gore splattered on his pristine white coat, staining it as the dentist continued to slowly saw from the corner of the mouth to the side of the face. The patient remained unmoving as the dentist worked. Once he had finished, he produced a plier from a tray beside him and began to pull the teeth out of the patient's now exposed jaw. The dentist remained calm as he removed each tooth and placed it on the tray beside him. Suddenly, I dropped my phone on the floor from the pure shock of what I was seeing. It all happened in slow motion. My phone slowly slipped out of my hands as I peeked into the little window. It lightly bumped against the door, making an audible thud, and then landed flat on the carpet. I froze in terror as the dentist turned around to face me. We met eyes for the briefest of moments as I backed away from the door. The dentist moved twice my speed towards the door and opened it. In his hand, he held his wireless electric saw, still covered in blood and bits of the patient's flesh. I strangely could sense the dentist smiling under his mask as his eyes contorted and narrowed. "Your turn," he exclaimed as he took a step towards me. His deranged and emotionless voice broke me out of my trance, and I started to run the fastest I had ever run in my life to the right hallway. The right hallway was my only bet at escaping, as I could no longer continue down to the end of the left hallway since the dentist covered it. As I ran down the right hallway, the dentist was at my heels, occasionally turning on the saw in anticipation. It was at that moment that I realized that if the fire escape was not located at the end of the hallway, I would face a fate worse than I could imagine. The end of the hallway came closer and closer as I ran, and to my absolute relief, the door indicated its use through the large bold text, "Fire Escape," painted on it in green. I quickly pushed the door open and came into the fire escape. Simultaneously, I shut the door and barricaded it with my body to prevent the dentist from getting in. As I caught my breath, the door shook and threatened to break as the dentist rammed himself against the door in an effort to open it. Pure adrenaline surged through my veins as I pushed that door with all my body weight for dear life. "Well, I'll just wait then. You'll have to leave that door and run down the fire escape eventually," he stated in a relaxed tone from the other side of the door. I knew he was right as I examined my surroundings once more. I'd never been in the fire escape. It was simply a collection of turning staircases leading to each floor. Since I was on the highest floor, there was no way to trick the dentist by going up or down. Sooner or later, I'd have to make a run for my life down those stairs. I just hoped I could turn corners and run downstairs faster than that dentist. I was about to make a run for it when a brilliant idea came to me. I reached for my pants pocket when it suddenly occurred to me that I had left my phone back in the hallway. And so I sprung forward and started to run down those stairs the fastest I've ever done in my life. Almost immediately the dentist came out behind me and started to run down the stairs. It was difficult running down the stairs fast. I had to be careful not to trip and fall, as that would definitely mean my demise, but I had to also run faster than the dentist, or else he'd catch up to me. I struggled to keep that balance as the dentist started to gain on me. I was down to the 5th floor by now, when suddenly I lost control of my left foot and started to fall down the stairs. My fall was short as I was at the end of the staircase, and I fell on the flat ground just before the next turn. My whole body was aching as the dentist turned the corner and started to make it down the staircase directly towards me. Once he saw that I had fallen down, he slowed his pace. I stared at his blood-stained coat as he walked down the stairs. I tore my eyes off him for a slight moment and noticed that the door to level 5 was right beside me. In a moment of desperation, I pulled at the door to level 5 before realizing that it was locked from the inside. The fire escape doors were designed so that they could only be opened from the floor, not the fire escape. The dentist let out a loud, cruel laugh as he saw me struggle. He had made it to the staircase and was now happily running the saw. He suddenly bent down and attacked me with the saw. I held up my hand in defense as a last resort. Burning pain seared through my palm as the flesh was ripped apart by the sharp, jagged edge. This pain filled me up with energy, and I surprised the dentist by kicking him between the legs. He howled in pain and backed away, giving me enough time to get up and run down the next flight of stairs. The dentist gave up chase somewhere down the fire escape, and I safely made it back to the ground floor with only a deep open cut on my palm. Blood was dripping steadily from my hand as I walked into daylight again. I had narrowly made it out. That was months ago. My palm still has scar from the incident, and I had to get a new phone. I haven't told anyone about what happened, but today I don't feel safe anymore. I got a call from my old number on my new phone. It was a lazy Friday night. I was binging on my kind friend's Netflix account while eating another microwavable meal. I turned off my crappy 30-inch smart TV and decided to call it a day. The weekend was always the favorite part of my week. I didn't have to go to that dusty old gas station and stand at the counter all day. It always surprised me why the gas station wasn't closed down yet. On a busy week, I would get about 5 customers. I had these thoughts in my head as my body switched to autopilot. I walked to the bathroom, brushed my teeth, and jumped right into my cheap single bed. The springs in the mattress squeaked in protest. I pulled my blanket over me and relaxed. The usual anxious thoughts filled my mind as they always do at night. Do I even have a future? Am I going to die in this stupid apartment? I pushed them to the back of my mind and turned over on my side. I closed my eyes and naturally hung my hand over the edge of the bed as there wasn't much space on the bed anyways. I struggled to get into a comfortable position on the rock-hard mattress. Sometimes I wonder if it'll be easier sleeping on the floor. I closed my eyes and tried to fall asleep. More and more thoughts filled my head, and one by one disappeared. My thoughts got jumbled up on top of each other, and my mind got foggy. I was on the brink of sleep. Suddenly I felt an icy grip on my hand that sent chills down my spine. All my sleepiness disappeared. I couldn't move. I tried as hard as I could, but my muscles were not working. The grip on my hand got stronger and stronger. I saw another pale, ghostly hand holding onto my hand that was hanging off the bed. Then suddenly the hand pulled. Its pull was strong, and combined with my paralyzed body, I fell out of the bed and came face to face with what was pulling me. She was under my bed. Her whole face was as white as a sheet of paper with bluish veins running through like thin worms. Black, dirty tangle of hair covered both sides of her face. Her eyes awoke a primal fear within me. They were way too big and circular. The little whites that her eyes had were pure white and devoid of any veins or blemishes. Her pupils were deep black and expanded until they covered most of her eyes. Her pupils made the white of her eyes just an outline. She had no eyebrows, which I guess is what unnerved me. If the description of her face and eyes made you uncomfortable, perhaps you should skip to the next paragraph. Her mouth was even worse. She had no lips. Her mouth looked like a hole on a white cloth. Her teeth were yellow and disproportionate. I screamed as she slowly started reaching out to me with white, blood-stained hands. Fortunately, I suddenly regained movement of my muscles, and my paralysis wore off. I lurched away from the bed and frantically made my way out of the room. I stood outside my room for some time. My heart slowly stopped pounding, and my mind started to rationalize what had just happened. Must have been sleep paralysis, I thought to myself as my heart returned to its slow rhythmic beats, and I grasped control of the situation. I walked back into my room, and surely there was nothing there. I checked under my bed slowly, expecting to get eaten by whatever the hell that was. There was nothing there. I chuckled nervously as I laid back down in my bed. What I saw next will never leave my mind. That she was somehow stuck onto my roof. Her hair was hanging downwards, and her neck was bent backward nearly 360 degrees. She was looking down at me. Her whole of a mouth curled into a menacing smile, and she emitted a high-pitched sound. I stumbled out of my bedroom and grabbed my car keys and coat. She slowly followed me out. I got into my car and sped off until she was far, far away. Once I had calmed down a bit, I decided to go to a club or bar. Later in the morning, I would have headed off to my friend's house. I made it to my local bar and ordered a large glass to soothe my nerves. People were talking all around me, and I felt generally safer with everyone else around. Then I saw her outside the bar window. My breaths caught in my throat as she came closer and closer. I pushed and jostled through the crowded bar and made it to the exit. I ran to my car and drove. I've been on the road for a couple of days now. I'm running out of money and time. She appears as soon as I stop somewhere, and she will slowly walk towards me. It took me a couple of days to write this post. I wrote this solely as a warning to all of you guys. Once she's done with me, she'll come for more people. I grew up hearing the same old legends as you did. Salem, medieval England. Innocent women drowned and burned at the stake in the name of rabid religion. My dad was a huge history geek and used to show me the witches' marks in the cottages we stayed in when we traveled around Scotland. They were strange symbols, sometimes prayers, etched into the walls or over the doors in a supposed attempt to lock out the forces of evil. Last summer, I went with friends to a camp in New England. It's taken me this long to say anything about it, because I'm still not sure what happened. I'm still not sure I'm not just insane. But yesterday, when I saw the reports of the missing family, I knew I had to say something. The trouble with ghost stories is that they always tell you there's some way to protect yourself, some symbol to draw or prayer to say or handsome exorcist to call on. There isn't. There is only warning. The camp was set up at the edge of the Black Lake, seemingly bottomless, and we knew its history going in. Liam grew around there, said the kids used to call it Witch Lake, and sing garish songs about Breakneck Sally. We laughed about this in the car ride up as we passed around the Google Docs itinerary in a blunt, or most of us did. Hannah only chewed the bottom of her lip and watched the trees race by in a gray blur. I tell you, it looked like any other woodland tourist camp in Connecticut when we got there. I wish I could say there was a sign or a feeling or an obviously sinister vibe, but the first thing I noticed was the colorful map display and the bulletin board advertising free face painting for children under 12. We stayed in cabin 23, and that was where we first saw it. Stooping under the low doorway, we filed in and sauntered around to look. The floors were old wood and scuffed with decades upon decades of us. The fireplace was stone made nearly black by soot. The furniture was startlingly modern. On the back wall was a plaque discussing how cabins 1 to 29 had been built as part of a fur trading camp in the early days of the colonies, then swiftly abandoned after 11 months due to what has only been recorded as blight. As I made a slow turn around the room, my eyes caught on a line of symbols, etched deeply into the wood over the window, and I jumped. "Holy shit!" I muttered. John came up behind me and squinted at them. They were smudged with black at the edges, like they'd been burned in. "What is it?" he asked. Normally, we'd be asking him. John was a classics major with several minors in all kinds of eclectic nonsense. At least one of them was in linguistics. Liam, his roommate since freshman year, called him Indy after Indiana Jones. "They're witches' marks," I said, running my finger over the jagged lines and whorls. I was pleased to know something that John didn't. People used to put them over the entrances to their houses to keep witches out. Hannah made a squeaking noise in the back of her throat. John laughed and turned to wink at her. "Come on now," he chided me. "Don't scare her." "I'm serious," I said, but my mouth quirked up in a barely suppressed smile. Hannah was too easy. My dad used to drag me around to look at them when we'd go visit my grandpa. They're all over Scotland. "There's one above the door too," Liam quipped, leaning over the back of the couch with his arms folded next to Hannah. "It makes sense. They would need those here to keep out Breakneck Sally." We all laughed except Hannah, and threw our bags down in whatever corner or surface we could find before heading out to explore the lake. There was still an hour or two of daylight left, and we wanted to take advantage. "Why do they call her that?" I asked Liam as we followed the trail back to the lake. "Breakneck Sally. He shrugged. My brother always told me it was one of the wives of the fur traders, he said. Back when it was a camp, the 1600s or something. Apparently they thought she was a witch, so they hung her from a tree by the lake and she broke her neck, but kept blinking at them and smiled. They were so freaked out they buried her under 10 feet of dirt to try and keep her spirit away, and that's when the blight came. She poisoned the ground, Hannah said in a knowing voice, drawing her arms tight around her. She didn't exist, John snorted. I tossed my head back and forth as we came up to the lake and the row of kayaks set out on the shore. I'm sure she did, I said, but the poor girl was probably just like literate or something. You know they'd kill a woman for anything back then. We weren't even supposed to speak. The good old days, Liam said with a dramatic sigh. I smacked him on the back of the head. We spoke no more of Breakneck Sally or her blight. Instead we jumped into kayaks and splashed each other, racing to the pitch-black center of the lake as Liam and John called out increasingly ridiculous dares to each other. Even Hannah seemed to have forgotten to be afraid, and my cheeks began to hurt from smiling, but I couldn't help but notice the gnarled and solitary oak as we passed it. It was stooped down like it was leaning over the bank, and one particularly thick branch jutted out far above the water. I told myself that the divot cut into it, widened with time, could not possibly have been from a rope. It was dark by the time we trudged back to cabin 23, tired and soaking wet from the lake. Mosquitoes gnawed at our bare arms and ankles, and I was so consumed with itching myself that at first I didn't notice it when we walked in. I nearly crashed into John, who had stopped just a few feet in the door and was frowning at something on the ground. What the hell? He asked in a flat voice. I followed his gaze and saw that our bags, all 4 of them, were neatly arranged side by side along the back of the couch. They were straight, spotless, and zipped up, even though I was certain I'd left mine spilling over at the bottom of the stairs after I dug through it for my Polaroid. Did someone go through our stuff? I demanded. That's like seriously messed up. They've never done that before when I've been, Liam said. Maybe they could smell the weed, Hannah ventured. Oh, Hannah, it wasn't the weed. Liam rolled his eyes and pushed past the rest of us to kneel before his bag and yanked the zipper open. Despite what he said to Hannah, the first thing he pulled out was a dime bag of pot. Besides, he muttered, pulling it open, it's all perfectly legal. I have a medical card. He stuck his nose into the bag, then reared back with a horrified expression and coughed. Arg, he scowled. Bro. What? John asked. He was crouched before his own bag now, checking to make sure all his belongings were in place. I was too, nothing was missing. It stinks, Liam huffed, tossing the bag aside. Must have got mold or something. Come on, they probably just sent in the cleaning people, and they lined the stuff up for us to sweep the floor or something. He stood up and slapped his knees. I need a drink. So when we were changed and less rattled by the disturbance of our bags, we flopped down between the couch and a nest of pillows on the floor and cracked open the beers we'd brought, chatting over the soft lull of some reality show in the television. There was something off about the beer, I remember. Something cloying and sour. We were college kids, though, and had all drank worse. Anyway, it's not like she cheated on her paper or anything, Hannah was saying, wrapped up in a woolen blanket beside me. If she plagiarized anyone, she plagiarized herself. She cut off there, and her face went white. Her gaze was fixed on the window next to the door. Who is that? She whispered. We all turned at once. I felt a spark of annoyance. Sure, it was just going to be a swaying tree or at most a raccoon, but no. It couldn't have been more obvious than this. A figure stood outside, human, but wrapped tightly in white linen from head to foot, like a mummy. Her arms were free, hanging with tattered scraps of cloth, and her hands were black with dirt. Judging by the shape, she was a woman. Liam and John slowly stood up from the couch. Liam shook his head. I don't know. Maybe some kind of freakin' reenactment to scare people. Well, it's messed up, I snapped, pulling Hannah closer to me. Tell them to get lost. The boys exchanged a quick glance, and John tipped his glasses back on his nose with an uneasy frown. Swallowing, Liam nodded and shuffled up to the window to tap on the glass. All right, man, he called. You got us. Go on to the next one, huh? Our friend doesn't like this kind of stuff. The woman stayed motionless. Just go away, I yelled. We didn't sign up for any kind of scary experience or anything. We're just trying to watch TV. Nothing. She stood a few feet from the cabin, arms slightly apart from her body and moving softly with each breath. Listen, Liam said, I don't want to have to call the front desk. She moved so fast I'm not sure any of us saw it. We just heard the crack like a dry log breaking and were left gaping at her, now only inches from the window, with her head bent to the right at a 90-degree angle. Jesus! Liam yelped, springing backwards. Hannah began to whimper. All right. I fought to keep the panic from my voice. Liam called the front desk. Tell them some, asshole. I rose my voice at that part, hoping she could hear me. Is messing with us outside our cabin. Liam fumbled his phone from his pocket, and I saw his fingers trembling slightly as they worked to dial in the number. She began to move. Her legs were too long and bent strangely as she walked like the broken limbs of a puppet. At first I thought she was retreating, cowed by the threats to call the front. But then I saw her ghostly form slip past the window through the kitchen, head still bent and staring in at us even as her body went forward. Then she appeared in the back window, then by the door again. She was circling the house. I want to go home, Hannah whispered. Tears were streaming down her face. This isn't funny. I know. I tried to turn in time with her, to predict when she'd pass through the window, but each time she surprised me. She was saying something now, muffled by the cloth over her mouth and garbled in the trappings of some language other than English. It had a monotone, chanting quality to it, and sent shivers down my back though I didn't know a word she was saying. Her voice sounded like breaking glass. Damn it! Liam cursed, running a hand through his hair. The front desk isn't picking up. It won't even go to voicemail. Just keeps ringing. John, what's she saying? I asked, tugging on his sleeve. I had pushed Hannah back so she was half behind me. I'm not sure what I thought that would do. Maybe if I could just keep her from seeing. But she watched the woman more than any of us, eyes wide with terror. It's... John shook his head. I think she's speaking French, but it's old, like 1600s? Liam asked. Liam, shut up, I snapped, glaring at him. This isn't the time. Well, I'm just saying maybe this person is pretending to be. John was listening now, keyed into the constant chanting and spinning slowly around the room to keep his ear to the woman. Something about soup, he muttered. A soup of your entrails. The darkness is already inside. God has turned his back and... He stopped, stock still, in the middle of the room and blanched, his jaw suddenly snapping shut. He was still listening. 1, 2, 3 whole seconds. We watched him hardly breathing. Liam, he whispered. Call 911. Wah! Jesus, man. Call them now. All right. Liam pounded the numbers into his phone just as the woman, who had passed by the back window, pounded on the side of the cabin. Hannah screamed. John turned his head to the side and vomited. Another bang. The cabin shook, and I could not see where she was but a flash of white blurred at the edge of the window, flapping in the stale summer breeze. Call them, John insisted. I can't. Liam shook his head with a frantic look in his eyes. There's no service. There was no time either. The banging had turned into a series of grunts and scratching noises against the back wall, and they got higher and higher up until we found ourselves with our heads tilted back towards the ceiling. Faintly, through the second floor above us, we heard shuffling footsteps. My God, Liam breathed. Is she on the roof? She let out a feral howl. It was unlike any animal I'd ever heard, but it wasn't human either. All of us were screaming by then, and though Liam had been telling the truth, we all tried to dial 911 for ourselves. No avail. It rang and rang and rang. The footsteps quickened. The ceiling shook and she sounded like she was somehow getting closer, but I couldn't think how. I didn't see her out of any of the windows, and the stairs were clear, and the only thing on the roof was... We all locked eyes on it once. The fireplace. She was coming through the chimney. It happened so fast. First, I think the TV went out. I don't know why that stands out so clearly in my head, but the host of the reality show had been mid-sentence, talking about today's challenge is... And then he was cut off, and the room went dark as the lights cut only seconds later. We all bolted towards the front door blindly, and then Hannah screamed. She screamed louder than the rest of us. The only thing I could hear beyond her terror was that deep muttering French. Hannah! I scrambled through the dark for her. In the moonlight that came in through the windows, I could see an arm reaching out from the fireplace, 2 long fingers wrapped around Hannah's wrist and dragging her in. She was sobbing so hard she was making herself retch. I grabbed her, trying to pull her back out, but all it did was move me along with her, even when the boys came and locked their arms around me. We were all getting pulled into the fireplace, and Hannah, save for the bit of her sleeve that I was clutching, was disappearing up the chimney. Help me, she shrieked. Ruth, let go. Liam yelled to me. We have to help her. I cried. You're hurting her. Her arm. Let go. He was right. I was keeping her arm out at a dangerous angle while the rest of her body moved up, but I couldn't bring myself to let go. In the end, it was John who ripped me away from her and practically carried me out of the cabin. We could hear her screams for half a mile through the woods. The administration's building was 1 mile out, on the other side of the lake. None of us said a single word to each other as we ran towards it, along the family-friendly and well-lit trails with the mosquitoes still trying to get a taste of us. I was crying. Liam was shaking. John still had vomit on his chin. They said they hadn't gotten any calls from Liam. After desperately trying to calm us down enough to get insensible story out of us, they must have gathered enough to realize that something had petrified us, and they called the police. At my insistence, they didn't wait for them to arrive to send security out on a golf cart to check cabin 23 and try to find Hannah. Nothing. And the police, nothing. They took statements from us and asked us if we had been drinking. The sour beer had done us no favors. John, Eve the voice of reason, stressed that whatever we thought we saw, the important thing was that our friend was missing. They had to find her. They did find her, but not until early the next morning after the police listened to our story 3 times, and the paramedics had to give me and Liam both Xanax to calm us. Hannah was found huddled at the base of the huge oak by the lake, naked and covered in dirt and scratches, inconsolable. She would not say what happened to her, just kept muttering. The darkness is already inside. It looks like a psychotic break. One of the EMTs told me gently as they put her in the ambulance. You sure you kids didn't take anything? In the coming days, we repeated our story countless times, no matter how much people told us it was ridiculous or accused us of an elaborate hoax. To their credit, the police combed the place over. The whole campsite was evacuated, and they tested the roof of the cabin for footprints, the windows and walls for prints, and yes, even the fireplace. They went through everything, and all they came up with was the weed and the beer. Ergot, the investigator explained to us and our parents and Hannah's parents after a week or so had gone by. He laid a bunch of photos out that neither me nor Liam nor John took one look at. They meant nothing. It's a type of fungus that can cause strange behavior, convulsions, even hallucinations. We found it all over the marijuana you guys brought, and in the beer too. Somebody's cooler must have been contaminated. Liam shook his head, eyes distant. I brought the weed and John brought the beer, he muttered. They weren't in the same cooler. The investigator shrugged, nonplussed. It's the only thing we've found that explains anything, he said. Ergot, it's almost like very potent LSD. If it was in the stuff you were drinking, you all essentially had one hell of a bad trip. The same bad trip, John confirmed with a raised eyebrow. It's famous for this, trust me, the investigator insisted. Been around for centuries. It used to cause big blights on grain and stuff and make everyone around go crazy. I felt my mouth go dry. Blights? Yeah, he nodded at me, seeming pleased that I was catching on. But you all are probably fine now, the doctors say. It doesn't stick around in the system. Your friend. His face turned a bit nervous, and he glanced at Hannah's silent parents. She had a worse go of it. Some people's minds just can't handle that. Hopefully they get her all straightened out soon. Many thanks. Shaking hands. Our parents talked and talked, but none of us listened. We wanted to visit Hannah. They said she wasn't up for visitors. Since that last summer, Hannah has not been released from the psych ward. She has not been up for visitors either. John crashed his car into an oncoming train, died on impact. No one said it was on purpose. They didn't have to. Liam went dark. He dropped out of school, deleted all his social media accounts and blocked my number, and I haven't heard from him since. I ran away. I told my dad I wanted to live in Scotland with my grandpa, and on rainy afternoons when it wasn't fit to wander the Highlands, I sat in his warm living room and stared at the witches' marks over the door, wondering if they were just as useless as the other ones.